it's MMA. Let's get into it. And just like that, we are back with Fight Night picks and getting set for UFC Vegas 83. It's the Fight Night featuring China's Song Yadong taking on Chris Gutierrez. As always, one half of your host duo, Craig Allan, X, and Instagram at Craig Allan FNP. With me to my left, to your right, respective socials, massive Dolphins fan.
They did great
I
today.
matched by the color there with the Tottenham Hotspur uni, but Matt, the Dolphins are winning. I was winning last weekend. Of course, you've been winning throughout the season. But when we look at this card, Matt, in terms of winning, there's a reason why I say, well, it's MMA, right? Because a few years ago, at the very end of the year, all of a sudden, John Jones, picograms, and we're moving a card from Vegas to California. But on 24 days' notice, all sorts of fights are moved from ocean to ocean. Well, it's all the Pacific, but realistically from China to Vegas, it was supposed to be UFC Shanghai. There was supposed to be from 125 pounds to 155 pounds road to UFC finales. Chef's kiss, they're gone. You don't even have to worry about them. And all of a sudden, we lose certain fights, like Zhang Mingyang's long-awaited UFC debut. He was supposed to be taking on Bredesen Habero. That one out due to travel restrictions. So ultimately, it was a 10-fight slate. On short notice, you had Steve Garcia supposed to be taking on Melquizael Costa last weekend. It was nixed due to what seemed like an illness for Garcia. It's been added to this weekend. Also on short notice, Saturday night, a week's notice, it was added Daniel Marcos to take on Carlos Vera. That announced by Jake Noker, a friend of the show and a guy who does a good job interviewing fighters. I'll talk about that as I go through it. So Matt, 12 total fights now on this card instead of 10. I had to do a little bit of an audible here on Sunday getting ready for these fights. 5 total ranked fighters on the card. And again, on short notice, a co-main event, Anthony Smith stepping in, getting a big-time opportunity.
Exactly.
Seems like it's every other weekend for him. The former title challenger, he gets to take on Khalil Rountree. So a lot of fighters on this card, debuts on this card, second times out on this card. And listen, somebody said last week, and I quote, Zach Mill3812 said on YouTube, Craig, such a grouch, just cancel the channel now. Well, guess what, Zach? I've got something special for you, Matt. How about this? A little bit of fun from our childhood. Here's a sour warhead. Apparently, I'm just a sour grouch about these fights. But Matt, we have 2 weeks left with Fight Night picks to preview these. And as bad and as big of a filler as this card might be, I can still get excited about some of these fights.
That was a very sour candy, and coming off last weekend, that was one of the more entertaining Fight Night cards you'll ever see, so hopefully as our mouth fills with saliva, we can have another one of those really phenomenal cards. Oh my goodness, this is hard.
You gotta keep talking, but
I thought it was your turn.
Again, a lot to look forward to. Song Yadong, he wasn't able to get it done a couple of fights ago. He's been on a roll. That last win was a big-time one.
Big rebound, yeah.
Third main event for him in a row. And for Chris Gutierrez, man, this guy is a leg kick king. You can see that in the thumbnail. So a lot to look forward to here on the channel. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night picks, we always say. Let's get into it. Dana White's Contender Series vets battle it out at strawweight. Coming up this weekend, we have the Invicta FC Atomweight champ following in the footsteps of Jessica Penne, Michelle Watterson, yes, Jinyu Fry. It's Hyun, formerly known as Amanda Tayani dos Santos. She's going to be taking on the multiple-time world champion BJJ, Talita Alencar. And Matt, for Hyun dos Santos, a lot of people know her from her last loss, maybe not her recent wins. I mean, she did lose to Denise Gomes over there on Contender Series last year. It was a bit of a lackluster performance. It's a pretty big underdog. And for Dos Santos, you look at the wins that she had on the regional scene, and they weren't all that spectacular. Rather, they weren't against the most spectacular level of competition. You can say that about both these women, really. But when you do look at it for Dos Santos, she goes outside, she gets a win, she has a couple of wins over with Invicta, and I'll throw up a picture there so the people can see, Matt. Her first fight, she takes on Canadian Katie Saul, Matt. Katie Saul, I thought looked a little bit like Amy Adams and a little bit like, I don't know, pick any other actress. It was a really odd look there.
How dare you say Amy Adams looks like any other actress, first of all?
It was just an oddball
That's
look.
disrespectful.
But she gets a win over a Canadian, Hyun dos Santos. No stranger to fighting Canadians one-on-one against somebody I mentioned on the channel, maybe too much, Lindsay Garbat. So she was able to get it back against Garbat and win that BTC belt the second time out. For dos Santos, though, her last time out, takes on Jillian DeCourcy, and she's able to absolutely win that belt. Two of the judges had it 50-45, one of them 48-47. But going back and watching that fight, Matt, that was a very complete performance over 5 rounds for dos Santos, who looked as thin as a candlestick at 104.3 pounds.
But wasn't that the nice thing to see out of that fight? We did get to see the whole depth of her style. She's not just a grappler. She's not just a striker. She does have levels to all of her game, and that's the nice thing to see.
Dos Santos was an underdog in that fight, and DeCourcy, mainly known from Twitter or X, but Jillian DeCourcy's a really good fighter, and I don't care if DeCourcy was up there in her 30s. That's a tough test, and that's a really good win.
And I thought dos Santos' striking looked pretty good in that fight, all things considered. I know it does get a little wild, and that's the hard thing I do have in judging this fight. I'm not sure what the ceiling is on a fighter like dos Santos, given what her striking is, because she can just get into the pocket and have some of those rock'em sock'em type exchanges, and she does throw very hard. She puts a lot behind it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you she's a knockout artist like Jessica Andrade, but if she is able to get in the pocket and make her opponents uncomfortable, especially in a matchup like this against Alencar, who is such a grappling ace, but doesn't necessarily have the chops on the feet of somebody like a dos Santos, who again, I'm openly admitting I don't know what her ceiling is, but I still think her floor is the higher of the two in this matchup. And the nice thing about dos Santos is she has the edge in striking, I would say. Her grappling is quite nice. She has a good top pressure. She does go for a decent amount of submissions too, and that's the nice thing to see. It will help her open up some of those spots, even though I don't think she should go for a ton of grappling in this matchup, because Alencar is someone who's not only going to go for submissions, but sweeps as well, and I think those sweeps off her back are going to be very beneficial.
If she gets on her back, she's going to get submitted. The trouble that I have with Hyun dos Santos and both of these women, if you're trying to offer a prediction on this fight, you go, okay, throw the picture up there, numbers on a piece of paper, look at Talita Alencar on BJJ Heroes. Again, a 2017 IBJJF World Champ. In no gi, she was the champ in 2016, 2017, and 2021. Like, she was brown belt world champ before that. Talita Alencar is to that next level of jiu-jitsu black belt, and she will mix it in with that grappling very well. Now, we talked about Talita Alencar not that long ago in kind of a roundabout way. I said, man, I hate this last season of Contender Series, and this is where some of the fans are like, man, you're such a grouch. Okay, bud. They signed everybody to the point where they signed Talita Alencar's opponent her last time out. It was Stephanie Luciano in a draw. Now, Alencar wins the first round and the second round with the takedowns and the grappling. And in the third round, she's got nothing left in the tank. Luciano gets a takedown. Luciano outstrikes the 10-8 in the third round. Dana White had this to say at the end of the draw. When you think about what Talita brought to the table in being a 6-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, she had her on the ground most of the time, and she didn't finish her. And then he signed Luciano because of the 10-8 in the third round. Like, they didn't sign Talita Alencar off Contender Series. You might think they did. You might think they did because she's competing before Luciano. She's competing before most people that were on that episode. There were only a few that were signed. Talita Alencar's one, and we already saw Kenan Krashowski get knocked out by runaway star of the year, Elvis Brenner. But when I went and I looked at Talita Alencar in all of her fights, they're very readily available. She turned pro in 2021. She trains out of Temple Martial Arts and Fitness in Delray Beach, Florida. And Alencar, I mentioned it in the last video, the Daniel Marcos fight, he's going to be taking on Carlos Vera. I said, hey, American Combat Gym, not the most popular, but Talita Alencar found her way there when she became a pro mixed martial artist off the grappling accolades. And she used to train at Alliance when she was just a combat jiu-jitsu champion and personality. So she goes to American Combat Gym, fights over Titan FC, gets a few wins. Combined opponent record for Talita Alencar, including Stephanie Luciano, 9-6-1. It's bad. Combined opponent record for Hyun dos Santos is 14-6. It's 58-43-1. Out of the losses, 28-13. Out of the wins, 30-30-1. So neither one of these women have fought the greatest level of competition. Obviously, we talked about D. Gomes for Hyun dos Santos. If you look at it for Talita Alencar in this pro turn, she fights Stacy Vega, who was, and I had to go back and have a look, 0-7 as an amateur, lost to Raquel Pennington, 0-3-1 as a pro right now. I'll tell you one thing, Stacy Vega gave her all she could on the feet, and I get it. Like, Talita Alencar, Temple Martial Arts and Fitness, working a lot of the striking. You can see that on her Instagram between racy pictures, Matt. Racy pictures. I felt bad looking, but she trains with guys like Daniel Mendez, who works out some of the striking, and the head coach Lee Probst, not Jeff Probst from Survivor, but Lee Probst. If you look at her for Talita Alencar, she's the most Dennis Tallulah strawweight I've ever seen in my life. No head movement, no defense when she strikes. She gets hit and teed off clean, and she struggles a lot with her takedown offense. She does. She's the type of fighter, and I've seen it in the Vega fight. The next fight that she had, she was 1-0 as a pro. She's taking on Contreras, Laura Milena Contreras. She's going for these takedowns. She gets her hands locked, she gets the body lock, and then it's almost like she doesn't know what to do for the takedowns.
And that's why I bring up the ceiling of Dos Santos. I still think she's the more complete fighter out of these two, but this is the other thing I have to say. Neither one of these fighters moving forward are really ever going to have a size advantage in this division, and that will be interesting to see, because remember when Joanna first made her rise and she fought Carla Esparza? So, like, Joanna, I know she's retired now, but she was a massive strawweight, right? Neither one of these fighters are going to have that type of advantage. I do think it's going to make their pursuit of takedowns much more difficult, even in a division like strawweight.
And if you're somebody like Hyun Dos Santos, I know she's now married to Colton England over at Fury FC. A lot of Fury mentions here. But for Dos Santos, if you look at her, she has decent takedowns. She has pretty wild striking. She has, and we talked about this last weekend, boy, was it a detriment. Wellington Turman moves his head a lot more, but his chin hasn't gotten much better. For Hyun Dos Santos, since she's moved her training from Brazil to Texas, training out of Main Street Boxing and Muay Thai, Crew Bob Perez, brother, she has incorporated a little bit more movement, and I have seen a bit of a progression of her game from when she first became a pro to where she is now. Obviously, that also comes with a step up in a level of competition along the way. If you look at it for Talita Alencar, I mean, even in her fight against Quintero, big judo throw for Quintero. Looks like it's going to go well, but in the scrambles, Alencar is able to do it. And you also saw that big Alencar win not that long ago against Kelsey Ernison, who was 2-2 and 36 years old.
You're the one who called it a big win.
Her opponent brought a lot of the striking forward. But my big question in this fight that I want to leave fight fans with, and listen, maybe people bring this up at B-Dub-Dubs. My big question for Talita Alencar is, I know she's 33. She's not very tall for the division. She's got one of the smallest reaches. She's almost in that Corey McKenna zone of small for strawweight. I wonder if Talita Alencar is like Jacqueline Amarim, that good at jiu-jitsu, but MMA, it's still a puzzle that's being solved. Or if she's a Tabitha Ricci, but I don't think she has the striking of a Ricci.
My issue is, anybody with that level of BJJ, you have to worry about them getting a stoppage, in MMA especially. And in the women's strawweight division, you're much more likely to see a submission than you are a knockout. We don't see a lot of knockout artists at 155 or 150.
D. Gomes.
Yeah, that's about it. And like Andrade in her prime, you know? So at those lower divisions, you are much more likely to see a submission. And that's why I'm always worried about these kind of trapdoor type of fighters like Alencar, who all she needs is that one moment to get an advantageous position. And if you zig when you should zag, that's going to be the end of the fight no matter what. And, you know, you can kind of agree with what Dana White said. It would have been nice to see her finish some of those advantageous positions in her last fight. But look at Damian Maia. Look at Mackenzie Dern. Like, not all of their fights where they get a lot of top control have always resulted in a submission victory. Remember when Maia fought Jorge Masvidal and the fight wasn't very good at all, but Maia took his back, he got takedowns. Yeah, he got busted up a little bit on the feet, but the control time was enough. I'm not comparing Alencar to Damian Maia in terms of BJJ, but you understand what I mean. Anybody with that kind of a background, you have to respect their ability to get a finish based on very minute mistakes.
You look at Dos Santos in this one, 14 wins, 8 of them by submission, 7 of 8 by armbar. Yeah, I wonder if that's going to be there for in this one.
But that's what I think. I don't know how likely we are to see Dos Santos go for a high volume of takedowns. Maybe she will if she is able to get Alencar hurt on the feet. The thing about Dos Santos that I do worry about a little bit, she can land on the inside of her wrist sometimes and not always on the end of her fist. And if she can do that, that's going to be easier for Alencar to duck underneath for an offensive takedown of her own. But again, I still think the totality of Dos Santos' game is much more well-rounded.
We'll see if Hyun Dos Santos is able to get it mixing up or if Alencar is able to pull away with that BJJ. Dos Santos is favored in the matchup. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Surprise us there to you. I think it's going to be the opposite. I'm going to say over under 65% Alencar.
I'll say under then.
I'm going to say under. And listen,
favorite,
I mean,
though.
591 total votes, 57% have Alencar to win, 76% by decision. That's a bit of an odd one. 43% that have Dos Santos, 83% have her to win by decision. So the fans see this one going to a decision. Matt, from Alencar, we have seen her win in the second round, so that is a thing, but I don't necessarily love the cardio, and I do like the kind of very game of Hyun dos Santos. Obviously, the threat of the submission is there for Talita Alencar. I did see the good takedown defense of Dos Santos her last time out against the Corsi. You've seen it throughout her career, and she is a little bit trigger happy sometimes to go for a submission. So again, you do worry a little bit here, but I do like Dos Santos with a more varied approach when it is standing.
I agree with you. I have Dos Santos in this fight. But again, Claudio Puelles, I think, is one of the better examples of this. Because when it goes bad, he looks like one of the worst fighters. Like, he doesn't look like a UFC level fighter. He's pulling guard. He's getting hurt by every shot in the book.
Scoots.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he doesn't look that good. But when it goes right and he gets on top of guys and he starts doing sweeps, he does look like an elite fighter, right? And for Alencar, I think we might see a potential matchup like that where she looks really bad round one. She's pulling guard. She's getting hurt by shots. But all she needs is that one advantageous position, and all we see is her get a finish. I agree with you, though. I'm going to go with Dos Santos because I think she's going to be able to get a lot more done on the feet.
Just go with a fighter out of Brazil, and you won't be wrong. Both of us going with Hyun dos Santos to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Some big-time matchups on this card. Song Yadong's taking on Chris Gutierrez in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. The journey of young Tatsuro Taira's MMA career continues, and already at 14-0, undefeated as an amateur, undefeated as a pro. He's looking to make it 15 straight and 5 in the UFC, taking on the 2014 IMMAF World Amateur Champion Carlos Hernandez. And there's so many different parallels and oddities in this fight that we could go through, but for Taira getting ready for his last opponent, Edgar Chairez, that wasn't even the original fight. He was supposed to take on Cledison Rodriguez. Rodriguez falls out. Chairez takes the fight on a little over a week's notice. They have it at a catch weight of 130 pounds. And Matt, Tatsuro won, I don't know, most of that fight. But if you'll remember, there was a short right hand landed by Edgar Chairez that dropped Tatsuro Taira in that matchup. And that's kind of been the last two fights for Taira. There's been a little bit of an oh, by the way, attached. I mean, his second to last fight, Jesus Aguilar runs in, lands a leg kick. Taira stumbles, he gets back up. And then all of a sudden, he's going for a single leg. And Aguilar pulls guillotine. And boy, did that look tight for minutes. Yes, minutes. Taira's able to get out of it, get the first round submission win. Numbers on a page, you wouldn't even think about how that fight went. But it has to be said, even in these last two fights, Taira's been wobbled by a couple of leg kicks and had to figure things out on the fly. And we've seen him come out on the right end of it. Again, we wouldn't be talking about an uber prospect if he was losing. But in this one, he's got another tough test taking on a really tested Carlos Hernandez here.
It's definitely going to be an interesting matchup, and it's one where it feels like Taira might be the more hyped of the two, even though he is the younger. So if Hernandez wins this fight, he might gain a lot more.
Tatsuro Taira in 4 UFC fights, all of them wins, takes on Carlos Candelario, takes on CJ Vergara, Aguilar, and Chairez. He's been an average of a minus 640 favorite in those fights. He was a minus 1250 against Jesus Aguilar. But when it does come down to this matchup, Matt, for Taira, a super gym in Haqparast, Okinawa, and we talked about that his last time out. He was training in Colorado at high altitude with Chepe Mariscal. That's got to be awkward because Carlos Hernandez was on the USA international team at 2014 Worlds, where he and Chepe won the championships. And now Taira was also training with him. And then the other thing for Taira, we talked about this as almost an aside, his big training partner in Japan is Chihiro Suzuki. That guy's had probably the best 2023. I mean, he beat Patricio Pitbull. He then went out there and he recently got the win over with Ryzen to win their featherweight strap. So Suzuki, strap a rocket to his back, he's going to the moon. But Taira's right up there too.
I would agree. He is one of the brighter prospects in this division. But like you mentioned, we have seen some of those cracks in the armor up until this point. And you worry if he is going to just be able to accentuate his strength, which is the wrestling. And his wrestling is unique, right? He's not going to go for as many single and double legs as you would imagine. He's great from the clinch. He's got those phenomenal upper body throws, but that's why this fight is so interesting, because Hernandez himself is very strong from a lot of those offensive positions. I just don't know if he's going to be able to win out in some of the wrestling from those spots, and that's why I do think Taira is so heavily favored in this matchup, because I do think we're going to get a lot of clinch, because Hernandez does invite some of those positions, and if Tatsuro is able to win out and get the offensive takedown, and at least be heavy in the top position, well, I'm going to worry a lot less about his striking defense if he is able to attain some of those positions than if he is just standing on the outside, because some of the boxing defense I worry about a little bit more. Yes, the leg kicks have landed, and you're right to bring it up, but the boxing defense too is the thing that could just end a fight for him when you never expect it.
Well, Taira, we talked about this on his rise up. He was a Shuto flyweight champ. He actually took a fight a few times at strawweight.
Well, how young was he when he got signed?
Bounced around. He started his MMA journey 15, 16, but if you look at it for Taira, he used to block punches by putting his arms straight out. Now he's kind of shored up his defense a little bit, but again, in tight, he tends to drop his hands. It got him caught against Shaida's. It looked like it was an elbow or short shot, but if you do look at it overall for a guy like Taira, gets his bread buttered with the wrestling. And if you look at Hernandez, picked 2 losses out of 11 total pro fights. This guy, the former champ on the regional scene with HFC, won to Gustavo Baylart, who was a Greco-Roman Olympian for Cuba, and he's a 1 championship star. So you lose to Baylart early on in your career, that's fine with me. The other loss, it was the second to last fight, Allan Nascimento by submission. That guy's a rock star, and he's fighting up at the top on this main card coming up this weekend. So for Hernandez, Contender Series and UFC, a win over Daniel Barez, a win over Victor Altamirano, the former LFA champ, and a win over Denis Bondar. If you don't go back and watch that Hernandez fight against Bondar, one judge scored at 29-28, the other 2 scored at 30-27. Carlos Hernandez beat up my guy Denis Bondar, and Hernandez was a slight underdog in the fight. But if you watch it in the 3rd round, Hernandez with the slam, just like last weekend, just like Onyx, slam, but there was a little bit of do-do-do. And originally, it was deemed that it was a knockout win with 2 seconds left in the 3rd round for Carlos Hernandez. Then they go to the review officials and they say, hey, there was a clash of heads after the head hit the mat, but during the slam, so they went to a technical decision. I don't know what a technical decision is anymore, Matt. I mean, the Brandage fight against Malkoun hits to the back of the head, it's a DQ win. But when Martin Budai does it to Huggy Bear, not Huggy Bear, rather, it's, what's his nickname?
It's normally in the 3rd round near the end of the fight.
Yeah, they decide, well, yeah, that's a technical decision, but I mean, what's a DQ versus not a DQ? It just, it's very...
a technical decision is pretty clear cut.
It's very ambiguous, but if you look at Fernandez, regardless, he gets the win in that matchup. When it comes down to their skills in this fight, sometimes the defensive grappling can be on the periphery. Out of alley flow striking for Carlos Hernandez, you see it. I mean, your former champ, Juliana Pena, out of that gym, Yair Rodriguez as well, Bilal Muhammad. So for Hernandez, the boxing is really his strongest suit. And if we don't really get a lot of successful takedowns from Taira, he could really struggle in a fight like this.
I think we are going to see a lot of successful takedowns. That's the thing. I agree with you. If he's not able to get to those positions, we could see a sitting duck on the feet. But he just is so strong at getting into those spots. And I don't know if Hernandez has good enough footwork to just evade the clinch for 15 straight minutes. That's what I worry about.
We'll see how it plays out. Taira, again, another big favorite. We look at the Topology vote. Surprised to us, it is to you. I'm going to say over under 90% Taira.
Probably over.
Probably over, way over. 818 total votes, 96% Taira, 72% by submission for the 4% that have Hernandez, 66% by decision. I'll go with Taira, but I don't think he's ever going to be a champion in the UFC, and I think he's going to have a hard time beating a lot of top 15 fighters.
What a hot take. He's not going to be champion. Yeah, most people aren't when you look at the grand scheme of things. I like him in this matchup, though. Again, I think from the clinch, that is one of his stronger positions. He does go for a lot of those upper body takedowns. But again, Hernandez, if he can defend some of those, and he does do a really good job himself of digging underhooks, he himself can go for offensive takedowns, although I doubt we're going to see a lot of those in this matchup. But again, I do like Tatsuro in the fight.
Matt, both of us going with Taira in the matchup. Let us know what you have down below in the comments section. Listen, Hyun Sung Park's going to be taking on Shannon Rash. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Just like that old song by Elton John in 1973, not Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, but Matt, Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting, and I don't know if it was made better on Hockey Night in Canada, the intro, Nickelback and Kid Rock. But it's getting late, and it was getting late on Saturday night, and all of a sudden, across the wire, it was announced by Jake Noker, good on him, that Daniel Marcos would be taking on Carlos Vera, somebody that a lot of MMA fans should know, and most likely love. You look at a guy like Vera, he was featured heavily with Fury FC, getting really big wins over there. He was featured on The Ultimate Fighter, Season 31, Team McGregor at Bantamweight. He did lose to the eventual champ, Brad Katona, two-time champ champ over with the Ultimate Fighter. But for Carlos Vera, a very, very interesting competitor. And I went back through it. Carlos was actually due, and you're not going to see it on his Tapology page, but I found this out through Jake on the Cage Side Press YouTube channel. He was due a fight at CFFC 128. That's coming up on December 15th. So he's getting ready for a camp against Vlisen Drejoni, who is their champ over there with CFFC. Now, Vilson missed weight his last CFFC title fight. He got a win there. But when you look at it for Vera, getting ready for a fight against Drejoni, you look at the way his opponent would have fought. Well, that's a southpaw he would have been fighting. A guy who throws really big, powerful shots, works in really heavy grappling. That's not really how Daniel Marcos fights. So on a week's notice, it will be tough for Vera that way. But when you look at Carlos Vera overall, the things that I had found, Matt, and I found this really interesting. Vera, 9-4 as an amateur from 2011 to 2014. From 2014 on, 11-3 as a pro. You look at it, he was 35 on The Ultimate Fighter. He was one of the veteran fighters, but considered a prospect, so that's why he was on Team McGregor. He really said when he was talking to Jake that he gained a lot of knowledge from being on Team McGregor, went over to SBG Ireland to train a little bit after he was on the season. But the biggest thing that I found from Vera was this guy's background is very, very high-level Taekwondo. That was his original martial art. You see him mixing it up on the mats. He's actually a coach and a trainer at 50-50 Gym. And when I saw that, I thought, 50-50. It's a weird name for a gym. Somebody big in the UFC's out of that gym that we don't talk about very often. Chase Hooper used to train there, so that was one of the reasons. Ryan Hall's the guy. And Carlos said going into the fight with CFFC in his corner, he was supposed to have Ryan Hall among others. So it's a really big thing for Vera. And when you go back through and watch his fights, you'll see that. I mean, 5 wins by decision, 1 by knockout, 5 by submission. And he really does incorporate the grappling into his game to where his jiu-jitsu's great. His takedowns aren't that great.
But that's the thing about Vera, right? He's a little bit similar to like a Carl Robertson when you look at the record at least, right? You look at it and think, hey, he's just this great grappler. He's going to go out there, shoot double legs, try to take the back. And, well, he will go for takedowns. They're a lot more of the head and arm variety. He does enjoy those upper body throws. There's a lot of fighters on this card. That's going to be a recurring theme throughout this whole entire video. There's going to be a lot of people going for some judo throws. But Vera does really like to go for some of those head and arm throws. And he does do a really good job defensively, too, with some of his submissions. You bring it up. He doesn't have the best offensive takedowns, but he does do a good job creating scrambles when his opponents go for takedowns, and he will get a little wily on the feet, right? I looked at the record, I looked at the breakdown initially, and then I went back and watched some fights, and I was surprised to see how good the striking can look in some of the matchups for someone who does only have that one win by knockout, because he is able to throw quite heavy. He does get a little bit overzealous with some of the shots, because the thing about Vera is he will overextend on some of those overhands and some of the kicks, and that's what I do worry about against a guy like Marcos, who, of course, is the more well-known out of these two. You guys have all watched him fight. But the one thing I want to mention is, do you think people might be buying a little bit low on Marcos because of that last performance against Davey Grant? He slowed down a little bit by the end. I know a lot of people thought Davey Grant actually won that fight. On rewatch, I thought Davey Grant won, but the way I look at it was, I thought Marcos definitely won round 2. I thought Grant definitely won round 3. Round 1 was close. I gave it to Grant, but again, it was a fairly close fight between those two.
Daniel Marcos is one of those oddball type of prospects. We have a few of them that are on this card where they're 30 years old, they have 15 wins, they have no losses. Are they a prospect? Probably not, but one of those fighters that beat really good competition in the UFC, but not on the regional scene. That's kind of the same thing between both of these guys. For Marcos, he was the champ, 300 Sparta was the promotion. He comes up, starts to train at American Combat Gym. Not a lot of people out of that gym. You know that one for Boston Strong, Matt? Who are we talking about? Charles Rosa.
Wow.
That's his gym. Talita Alencar also represented that gym for a bit. She's going to be on this card as well. But that's where Daniel Marcos is able to build some of his foundation. He was due a fight a couple of months ago. He's supposed to take on Victor Hugo. Hugo showed up 138.5. Marcos unaccepting of the fight. So he moves on and gets to take on Vera. But again, when you look at a guy like Vera, if you haven't seen him fight, you might think, geez, this guy's a little old. And I thought about tweeting that fight announcement.
He's a pretty athletic guy, though, I would say.
Athletic guy, coaches and trains, works with Ryan Hall, has good jiu-jitsu, porous takedown defense. You saw that in the Brad Katona fight. And to your point, like, you talk about the scramble ability of a guy like Carlos Vera. We saw it when he was taking on, not that long ago, his last kind of pro fight, if you will, Isaiah Gutierrez.
His guillotine's dirty.
His guillotine's really good. He can readjust, and that was off of a tricky takedown attempt that he's able to end up in the guillotine. It wasn't a traditional, I'm wrenching on this as you're going for the takedown. It was a really nice setup, and again, if you like it with Fury, Alex Morono on the call for that one, so you get shouts 2 weeks in a row. But I went back, I watched a lot of the Vera tape, and you can find it readily, but I found this really interesting out of him. This lends credence to the record. So his record overall, combined opponent record as a pro, he's 11-3. Add up everybody's record, it's 86-51. That's not that good. Out of the losses, 35-12, including when Carlos Vera made his debut, he fought a guy who was 14-7. That's kind of wild. So that is what it is. Out of his wins, 51-39 is the combined opponent record. So it's not all that good. It's gotten better near the end. You saw the loss to Brad Katona, but again, Katona won the season. Katona's really good at wrestling, and you see it out of Vera. It's a really weird, and I tried to think and pinpoint fighters that have a similar stance, and I couldn't think of anybody. Out of the southpaw stance, he holds his arms really wide. He throws a lot of kicks to the body, a lot of kicks to the head. He'll mix it up to the leg every now and again. You saw him trying for those prodding kicks, the oblique kicks, the kicks to the knee of Brad Katona, but some of his other opponents as well. But for Vera, not really active with the hands. He'll switch up to orthodox, and it's a completely different stance in orthodox. And usually when you see a southpaw go to orthodox, maybe it's to open up a leg kick, or maybe he's going for a hook to the body. But Carlos Vera just kind of shows a different look and doesn't do much with it. And the other thing that I found out of him, we talked a lot about fighters last weekend. I mentioned it with Zach Reese and some others. They just kind of back up, deer in the headlights, head all the way back. Carlos Vera doesn't necessarily do that, but he moves a lot side to side when things are in space. But when he does get backed up, he can tend to drop his hands and take as much space as he can until he gets to the cage, then against it, into the clinch, and he tries for takedown.
And that's the thing about Marcos, right? When you think about him at his best version, what is he doing? He's plodding forward, throwing those boxing combinations, mixing in the leg kick. He has great knees to the head too, and I almost like in this fight a little bit, and I will say this, I'll be interested to see these two square off, because in my mind's eye, I think Marcos is going to be quite a bit taller. I know they only have him listed as being 1 inch taller, but again, I'll just be interested to see how they're going to look once they do finally face off. But if Marcos is able to incorporate some of those knees and really make Vera guess and not be able to switch up his level changes, I think it's going to be difficult for Vera to incorporate some of that grappling into his game. And on the feet, again, I know Davey Grant looked pretty good against Marcos, but for the most part, Marcos has good output. He's a very damaging striker when he is able to land, and he can build, maybe not in volume as the fight goes on, but if he's able to damage his opponent, he can really get them out of there.
That's it. I mean, when you look at this fight, it was added in on short notice. We have a look over on Tapology for those fan votes. Surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under 85% for Sankora Daniel Marcos.
I think they're going to be high, I'll say over.
And they're really high. So 304 total votes, 95% Marcos, 68% by decision for the 5% that are Vera, 38% by decision, 38% by submission. And again, when I was going back and watching these Vera fights, this fight against Khalil Muniz, when you look at that one, it's a main event with Fury, so it's a really big spot. In that one, again, the takedown defense, a little bit suspects, but he's able to kind of get himself into some of these tricky leg lock positions. And you look at a guy like Vera, there's other fighters on this card. Maybe they only go for arm bars, or they only go for naked chokes. He's got a variety to his submission game. And so having Taekwondo as a first basis, growing up or being born in Ecuador, moving over to the States, Taekwondo, Capoeira, and then Jiu-Jitsu, he's got a really wide array. It's just, to me, he gives up a lot of distance when he's striking, which I don't necessarily love. He's kind of a low action, low volume type of striker. And again, we had this last weekend, the boxing of Bobby Green, the kicks of Jalen Turner. In this fight, it really is the boxing of Daniel Marcos, the kicks of Carlos Vera, but size for size and skill for skill, they're kind of the same on the feet. So for me, I do like the activity out of Daniel Marcos. It might seem like a little bit of an oddball considering his last performance against Davey Grant, but we've seen his ability to wrestle on the regional scene. I really do like the striking, so I'm going to go with Daniel Marcos in the fight.
I agree with you. I also like Marcos in this matchup. I do think it's kind of a get back on the horse type of a fight, because even though he won his last fight, in the court of public opinion, did he really? So I think for Marcos, it is important for him to not only get the win, but look good doing it. But I do believe he will be able to.
We'll see it for the guy that represents 50-50 Kaizen MMA and Team Ground Control from the DMV, Falls Church, Virginia. It's Carlos Vera. He's going to be taking on Daniel Marcos. Both of us going with Peru's own Marcos. Some big-time fights on this card, Matt. Anthony freaking Smith is going to be fighting Khalil Rountree in that co-main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. With Miesha Tate getting a dominant win last weekend, the bantamweight division is on notice and looking to make a breakthrough performance. Coming up this weekend, we have Luana Santos, the former flyweight. She's going to be taking on bantamweights. Yes, it is. It's Stephanie Egger, and there's so many different questions to ask when you look at a fight like this, because for Luana Santos, her last time out, she debuts in the UFC, a successful run at flyweight with the LFA. She goes in there against the Ultimate Fighter 31 champion, yes, Juliana Miller. And if you didn't watch that fight, and you look at Miller being then 3-2 and now 3-3, you might go, wow, Luana Santos, boy, she probably blew the socks off Juliana Miller. And I would say, kinda, because for the first minute and a half of that fight, it's Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and Juliana Miller has her foot to the floor.
She does.
She's redlining really it, and she's landing on Luana Santos. Matt, I mean, we were so excited about Santos coming into the UFC. Let's kind of throw it on over to a clip of that. And when you look at a fight like this against Santos undefeated as an amateur over with SFT. She was 3-0 over there. She becomes a pro. She's not really beating the greatest level of competition. So then you have to think, is she like a Tainara Lisboa, who was accomplished at Muay Thai, came in against Jessica Rose Clark as an underdog, not a good level of competition in MMA, lit the world on fire? Or is she one of those fighters like maybe an AJ Dobson that's on this card who didn't beat a good level of competition and it hasn't really worked out for him in the UFC? Well, we'll see that, but for Santos, you do like the fact that the striking is very good, and she does leave herself out there to get countered. That is one thing that I'll say. Throws really good kicks, has a nice Thai stance, but the hands will drop a little bit for Santos. She is a judo black belt, and it's weird because in certain fights they say she's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, in others they say she's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So that all remains to be seen, but she trains out of Team Lucas Minero, and that's a big time gym. I mean, Lucas fought in the UFC, had a fight of the night, had a performance of the night bonus, but we know a fighter out of that camp that she trains with. It's Dread. It's Luana Carolina. And that's a really good fighter to train with when you're getting ready for a fight like this. Again, you're trying to replicate some of the size. And Matt and I, we've talked about it for a while. Is Juliana Miller the biggest fighter at flyweight that you're going to find? I mean, quite possibly. So for Santos, she's got a lot to do, but the fight that she had against Jenna Bishop is a big one. Bishop is the most accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner you're going to find in women's flyweight. She competes now with Bellator. I know she's 36, but that's because her, I guess her grappling career really took over. So when you look at it, like in that fight, I had it all 3 rounds for Bishop. One of the judges scored a 29-28 for Santos. But you look at the rest of these performances, and they really are good. LFA 154, she's on the prelims. And she had a big reach advantage, big height advantage, and she was able to get it done in that one. She really is one of those pedigree type of athletes with that judo, with that jiu-jitsu, kind of like a Tabitha Ricci down a weight class, although Ricci had the Muay Thai to help her out quite a bit in her career. So when you're looking at somebody like Santos, not a lot of head movement. She will throw the jab, double, triple up. But the biggest thing that you got to watch out for if you're Santos' opponent, it's that big overhand right. We've seen her knock down opponents in the past. Again, not the greatest level of competition. She is a very accredited player on the ground. So the big takeaway from getting excited about Santos into the UFC was big overhand right, judo black belt, and as that round wore on against Juliana Miller, first minute and a half, it's all Miller. Next minute and a half, it's 50-50, but it is power jab like Trevin Giles for Luana Santos. Big overhand right starts to land. You saw a few knees in the clinch. You saw the uppercut there. Santos gets a standing TKO victory, and it's great. But Matt, this is one of those weird fights. Not just because Santos started her career at bantamweight as an amateur, as a pro. She has that one loss at 125 to Jenna Bishop, who's gone on to do great things, and I think is a really good fighter, and then continue to win. So now she's back up at 135 as Luana Santos. You look at her for Edgar. Edgar's in a weird category. She's 3-3 in the UFC. She's got a performance bonus win. Her last time out, she lost in impressive fashion to Irina Alexieva. Then she was supposed to fight Montana De La Rosa just a few months ago at 125 pounds. Didn't make that fight. So now you're 35 years old. You're 8-4. You're a judoka to the nth degree. I mean, we know how good Stephanie Egger is jiu-jitsu. You've seen that in her MMA fights, but also
on top and bottom.
2019 ADCC European champion. She went to a draw against Gabby Garcia at Worlds. Edgar is that good. So what did I have to do for this fight, Matt? I did exactly what I did last weekend. I said, Cody Brundage, it's been terrible. But why was he good in the first place? Dustin Stoltzfus, he's been terrible in the UFC. But why did he get to this point? With Stephanie Egger, I did the exact same thing. I went, okay, 3-3's all right. But how do we get to this point? And I went back and I watched her fight against Jessica Rose Clark, who pushes the clinch up against the fence. Egger looking to get those hands in the right spot, and then ultimately gets that big Koshiguruma. She gets the big windmill flip.
Right.
She gets a submission win. You look at Stephanie Egger's fight against King Reina Mora over with Ryzen, and at the start of that fight, it's all wrestling and grappling from Egger. In the third round, both women were very tired, and Egger was getting hit hard at the end of the third. But of course, Ryzen scored on the totality of the fight. Egger gets the win there. You look at the fight against Shannon Yong, she puts the pressure on it against Eileen Perez. Pressure absorbed, pressure then given out. So for Egger, it is really weird. So when I looked at this fight, I went, okay, I watched the totality of the Egger fights. I know what she does well, what she does poor. One thing that she does poor but well is that she moves her hands and blocks punches a lot by moving her head, moving her hands in the way of the punches, and letting them hit her shoulders. But with the judges, that doesn't really score all that well.
I think it's almost static defense. I don't think it's her reacting to the shots and moving out of the way like she's a prime Dustin Poirier.
Well, now, hold on. No, she's 8-4 and she's 35 years old at bantamweight. But the other thing about Stephanie Egger, she was doing a decent job of moving out of the way of the shots of Alexieva. She gets into a spot for a takedown. Looks like she's going to get it. Alexieva rolls in, gets the submission with the leg lock. But when I look at this fight, Matt, it very much is the Luana Pinedo fight against Amanda Hebus not that long ago. Both judo black belts striking, they're kind of one note, and now you get into a fight like this.
I hope we get 15 minutes of grappling between these two. Way more than 15 minutes of striking between them. Because although I do think Egger might be the more complete in terms of her volume's a little bit higher, she does hold her hands up pretty well. And Santos is a weird fighter, and I'm glad you brought this up. Her left hand does look good and technical, but her right hand's just this absolute windmill. And it's almost like if she could find a match between those two styles, where if she found the Goldilocks zone, it would make her style that much more effective. And even though she is very young in her career, the thing is she's only, 23 years old. I do think we are going to see some of those improvements as she is able to progress throughout her game. But this fight to me comes down to whoever can attain that top position on the mat, because both fighters are such talented grapplers that I think they are going to offer up difficulties off their back in terms of scrambling, in terms of, we'll see them threaten with a leg lock, maybe not for the leg lock, but just to try to create that scramble and get that top position. But it does come down to who can attain that top position and hold it for longer, because if neither fighter is able to gain that submission, and let's say Stephanie Egger is the fighter on the bottom and she's fighting for a lot of leg locks. We called it the Luis Smolka effect for years, and it was a fighter who's almost a little bit too comfortable on their back working from that position. That's the thing I worry about with Egger in a matchup like this. If she's a little bit too comfortable on her back working for some of those submissions, you're bringing up the judges don't like the defense. Well, the judges definitely don't like submissions off your back if you're not really able to get one for a long time and really make it difficult.
Yeah, it really is an oddball fight that way. And again, it was just me in the kayak talking about Luana Santos putting it on the Subi. But when you do consider this one for both of these women, buddy gym for Stephanie Egger, and it still is, but if you look at it for Luana Santos, she's trained out of 0-11 MMA team and Team Lucas Mineiro. For this one, she brought 0-11 MMA team's own Allan Bagoso, who's done big things. He main evented Contender Series in 2022. But they're training out of Team Alpha Male. So an interesting move there for Santos, because we have quite a few Team Alpha Male fighters on this card. Sumudaerji and Song Yadong at the top represent that gym. So listen, Danny Castillo is going to have his hands full. And that guy scares the absolute fuck out of me. He yells so loud in the corner of every fighter.
Passionate.
It's like, is that Devin Clark's dad? No, it's just a guy that used to fight in a lower weight class. He's very scary. But Matt, when you do look at this one overall, Santos is almost a 2-1 favorite in the matchup. She did, of course, get that big first round win. And I don't know how she didn't get a bonus beating Juliana Miller, but she didn't. For Stephanie Egger, the move down to 125 that didn't happen against De La Rosa a few months ago. Now she gets a chance at 135. We have a look at the Topology vote. Surprised us there to you. This happens when you have a so-so fighter and a young up-and-comer. I'm going to say over under 80% Santos.
I was thinking about 80. I'll say over.
And it is over. 625 total votes, 87% Santos, 71% by decision. For the 13% that have Egger, 59% by decision, Matt. It was said in a roundabout way, in other words, last weekend, if you're picking Stoltzfus, and Brundage, then it's probably time to fold up the channel.
You're patting yourself on the back.
Listen, man, I'll show up this week with receipts. There's only 2 weeks left. But when it does come down to this fight,
bad winner.
Who's the pick?
I do favor Santos because I think she's going to be able to make some of those improvements, fight in and fight out. Again, she is a very young fighter. I thought she was 26, honestly, not even 23, so she's younger than I even thought. I think size will maybe be an issue just because Edgar is a pretty physical fighter for this division. She might not be the biggest up bantamweights, but somebody who does use the clinch very effectively, so I don't think it'll be an easy fight by any means, but I think Santos can be able to hold some of those top positions a little bit longer, and for that reason, I like her in the fight. But I do agree with the Tapology voters. Sorry, not to cut you off, but I do see this going to decision.
I have a hard time with this one because this is the classic what's your why fight. I know Edgar did just only lose her last fight, but she's 35 years old. You don't want to do what everybody did with Miesha Tate, but has the division kind of seen her by? Because if you look at the losses for Edgar, she gets out wrestled by Tracy Cortez, a 125er up at 135. That was kind of a thrown together fight, but still you'd think, hey, the judo, the jiu-jitsu, it's good, and they didn't compliment anything. You look at the loss to Alexieva, and it is what it is. The other loss is to Maeda Bueno Silva, the phantom armbar in this UFC Apex. So it has to be some bad vibes for Stephanie Egger. I'll go with Luana Santos because I do like the striking, but man, Stephanie Egger, when she finds her positions, you saw that in the Perez fight, and I saw it especially in the rewatch. Egger's one of those fighters that could bust a parlay too and ruin a night. So Matt, for me, and for you, we're both going with Luana Santos in the matchup, but let us know, please, who you have down below in the comments section. Some big-time fights on this card. The Daniel Marcos fight against Carlos Vera, that's fun, but so Smith versus Rountree, you're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. You know we were excited about this fight last weekend, UFC Austin. We were due a possible fight of the night between the Mean Machine, Steve Garcia, and Melquizael, Costa, and ultimately the fight was nixed on the Friday of weigh-ins. Right before the weigh-ins, it was announced by MMA Fighting that due to an illness, Steve Garcia was out of the matchup late. I'm talking late on Saturday night into Sunday morning. The fight was re-added, or at least added to this weekend's card here at the Apex. So ultimately, it is a bit of a short notice call because you got the double weight cut for both these guys at featherweight. Garcia looking to take on Costa. We talked about this a lot last week, and we got a lot to say about this premier matchup in the featherweight division. When you look at this matchup, Matt, when I saw this on paper, I went, man, how can you not be excited about it? For Steve Garcia, why is he so hot? It's because of those last two wins. Really, any of his wins, his last three, but the last two in a row, he finishes Chase Hooper, knocks him down 3 times. I counted 4 knockdowns in that first round. He absolutely destroyed him. And against Shayilan Nurdambeka, I threw it out there. I mean, Shayilan looked really good. It was one of the bigger comebacks that you're going to find. If you saw my tweet out there on Sunday, I was smitten, Matt. I mean, huge comeback. He goes from the southpaw stance. It's a left body kick. He paws his right hand out there, and then he goes down with the hook to hit Shayilan Nurdambeka with that big-time hit to the liver. Shayilan drops like a sack of potatoes. Garcia on top. This guy, when he's on, is so animated and fired up.
Comeback is CM Punk and Survivor Series, you might say.
How long's that going to last? But when it does come down to it, Steve Garcia is one of those guys that win, lose, or draw, I'm going to get excited.
Just a fight of the night machine.
His fight against Charlie Ontiveros, if you'll remember. Axe kick to the head where he gets wobbled. He finds himself back in it. He drops Ontiveros multiple times. It's just bleeding like a stuck pig if Jim Ross, to make another reference to wrestling, was a thing. Steve Garcia had Ontiveros there. Now, when Garcia loses, he tends to get out wrestled, or you're able to kind of dip and dab a little bit, and you're able to piece him up. Now, Garcia was supposed to take on Sean Woodson not that long ago, back in September. He did an interview with JHK and the All-Star MMA. He said a back injury in training. He was grappling with a teammate. They got him in a twister. His back just got really tight, and then all of a sudden it was to the point where he couldn't do a lot. He was having some issues. He had to go to the PI. They recommended that he kind of move away from the fight, so to speak. So he's been back. He tried to get through it, but it just didn't work. So back injuries kept Steve Garcia out for a bit. For Mel Costa, the debut, short notice up a weight class against Thiago Moises, didn't go his way. He got submitted. Although He tried to throw up some submissions out there. That's going to be hard against one of the better grapplers at 155. But his last time out against lights out Austin Lingo, the solid wasn't lights out, and Lingo went down. Costa dominated him. 230-27s, 130-26. I was on the side of 30-26. Costa looked as good as he's looked on the regional scene, and almost as good as he's looked ever. So I'm really excited about this. Costa training out of a big gym, as is Garcia, because Garcia, you get Texas, you get everybody out of New Mexico as well, training out of Jackson Wink. For Melquizael, this guy's training out of Shoot the Box Barao, and if you like the way that Joe Anderson Brito looked recently, you're going to like the way you look with Mel Costa fighting.
And that's why I'm so excited for this matchup. I think Costa might be slightly flashier in this matchup. He is going to go for more of those spinning techniques, and
might not be a good thing.
Exactly. When you fight Steve Garcia, you almost want to stick to the basics and not be too outside of yourself, because he can make you pay for any weakness in your game. And Costa's striking might get a lot of the spotlight in this matchup because he is so dynamic on the feet. He throws with a great output too when he's really able to get in the pocket and use all of his weapons. But the offensive wrestling is pretty high level too, and you bring it up. When Garcia loses these fights, it rarely is on the feet, even though we have seen him get tested and clipped on the feet, but he can get out wrestled in a lot of these matchups, and I do think Costa has the type of wrestling and the overall top game to at least stay in that position throughout this matchup. And I know everybody wants to get excited, oh, Costa versus Garcia could be fight of the night. I think the path of least resistance for Costa is use some of that offensive wrestling and not get too flashy on the feet.
Saw the Luis Pena fight against Steve Garcia. It wasn't great. That was UFC Rio Rancho when Jan Blachowicz called out John Jones to the tune of nobody cheering because New Mexico didn't really show up.
He did start Corey Anderson, though.
I don't think there were a lot of Coors Light strength that night because that crowd was as mild as could be. Now, if that crowd was in the Maritimes of Canada, the roof would have gone off the place. But when you do look at this matchup, Costa, a very flashy striking arsenal. He likes to do a lot of the spins. Garcia talked about it with JHK. He knows that, so he's going to try and be straight down the pipe. But when you do watch the Costa fights, he will try and play jiu-jitsu a little bit, maybe more than he should. You remember back in 2018, he was in that big viral clip because he got submitted for 90 seconds. He was unconscious, that was pretty gross, but a very big record coming in at 27 years old, being 20-6 in the matchup. Costa is heavily favored in this one. Complete game from Costa, the big power to Garcia. And from that southpaw stance, he gains a big advantage on these orthodox guys. He's got really good length. He's got really good distance management. I know Mahashata finished him. That was a surprise to a lot of people. And again, Pena did with the wrestling.
But that's the thing about Garcia's style, right? For as powerful as he is, it's not the most refined of techniques. There is a bit of that early career Justin Gaethje to him, where you can hit him. He is very available. But again, it is one of those risk-reward matchups that you have to take into consideration, because if you are going to stay in the pocket and try to land on Steve Garcia, just know there's a lot of power shots coming back.
And again, against a lot of orthodox strikers, Garcia's going to have that in his back pocket in this matchup. Yeah, Costa will switch his stance a little bit, but primarily this is southpaw versus southpaw, and we have a few of these on this fight card. And yeah, I mean, these two guys being southpaw versus southpaw, really powerful strikers. You look at it for Garcia, he packs a punch. When you look at it for Costa, he's so creative, Matt. We throw it on over, we have a look at Tapology, and when you consider this one, Matt, I mean, Garcia, Mel Costa, the fan vote, it's a surprise to us, it is to you. I'm going to say over-under, and these votes are not going to have many of them because this fight was just added, but I'm going to say over-under 72.5% Costa.
I think they are going to be over, but hopefully it was nothing serious for Garcia, right? I just want the best version of this fight because we both had such high hopes for what it could have been and the fireworks that we did expect. And I can't get over how great that last Fight Night card was. We thought this could have been Fight of the Night on that card. It just speaks to how talented both these fighters are. But I do think the fans are going to side with Costa.
And oh my gosh, 263 total votes, 73% Costa, 47% by decision, 41% by knockout for the 27% that have Garcia, 35% by decision, 56% have him to win by knockout. And Matt, last week I had Mel Costa. I'm not going to change that now. I think he's a little bit more well-rounded, but we saw last weekend 30 years of jiu-jitsu and MMA, and it's been king, but now the Slam King is the wonder.
That's all you need.
And that's all you need. So I do like the more well-rounded guy in Mel Costa in this matchup, but this should be a really good fight.
And I agree with you. I have Mel Costa in the matchup, but you can't throw up enough red flags when you're fighting somebody like Steve Garcia, someone who we've seen face adversity and come through on the other side. He carries his power very late into the matchup. So again, I think this is going to be in the running for that Fight of the Night spot without a doubt. And hopefully we just get the best version from both guys. Hopefully it was nothing serious is with Garcia.
The Andy Dufresne of MMA, Steve Garcia. But Matt, both of us going with Costa in the matchup. Let us know who you know. Let us know who you have down below. And Matt, the next matchup on the card, some UFC newcomers, Rayanne dos Santos. You've got Talita, Alencar. Definitely a fight to look forward to at strawweight. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, a flyweight prove-it fight with no road to UFC in sight. All the way from Shanghai down to Vegas, we have February's road to UFC winner. It's Peace of Mind, Hyun Park, and he's going to be taking on the Turkish delight, Shannon Ross. And why do I say this one's a prove-it fight? Because if you look at it for Shannon Ross, I mean, the 5-on-in, it's 1-4. He's 34 years old. He's lost 3 fights in a row by finish. And even that 4th fight in the 5-on-in, it was by finish, albeit to Steven Erceg, where he dropped by the right hand. He got submitted pretty quickly. But if you look at it for a guy like Shannon Ross, this guy can absolutely bang. He's got decent cardio in the fights that he's winning. He's got decent wrestling, and he's got pretty good pressure and combos. And when you look at a guy like Hyun Park, why do I say he needs to prove it? Well, I mean, he is on the way to trying to get an 8th finish in a row, because that's kind of crazy. He's undefeated as a pro. He won road to UFC, but if you look at it in his last 2 fights against Sunguk Choi and the fight before that against Mr. Dart himself, Tatnoi Quiram, he has gotten dropped in these fights. So a really big opportunity for Hyun Park, and we had a lot to say about him before his UFC debut. Very interesting road to UFC tournaments for Hyun Park. I mean, this is a guy so interesting, undefeated as an amateur fighter, 3-0, 7-0 as a pro. He was a double G flyweight champ before he made it into the tournament, and inside of the tournament wins over Sirigar by knockout. And Tatnoi Quiram, who, if you look at it for Tatnoi, I mean, at one point they were training partners, like there was bad blood. Tatnoi was ripping darts post-fight after his first win. They square those guys off, like they're absolutely loving it.
Fight too.
And Park looked great in that fight. So for Park, I mean, he really is an interesting case when you consider all of this. 6 of his 7 pro wins are by finish, 3 by rear naked choke, and 3 by knockout. I mean, he is kind of one of those complete package type of fighters, but I will say this, Park had the respect of the odds makers in his fights on this season, because he's minus 200 in that debut against Sirigar, finished him in the first round. If you do look at it, he was a slight favorite over Quiram in that fight, so Tatnoi. But if you do consider, I mean, even with Double G when he was the champ, I mean, I went back, you watch his fight against Ju Hwan Kim, and in that fight, I mean, he beats the brakes off of Kim to where Kim's like laying down on the ground, like he's had enough, and the referee goes over and he's like, stand up, and Kim just keeps laying there. He grabs Kim's arm and stands him up, and then he eats a knee and gets beaten into the mat. Like, it was tough. But again, Park is a very, very good fighter in that way. I absolutely love the striking. I love the ground game that he has. His offensive wrestling isn't, like, we don't see it a ton, but it is pretty good. His defensive wrestling, maybe there's some question marks, especially against a guy like Choi. But the only weakness I could find is he's got a little bit of a low right hand sometimes. Like, that's basically it for Park, though. Matt, I know you're excited about this one. Obviously, for Hyun Park, big finish in the 3rd round his last time out. And again, that Tatnoi fight where he gets dropped, but he rallies back. This guy's a finisher to the nth degree, and I know you're excited to see more out of both of these guys.
It is a really interesting fight, and I'm glad that you set this fight up the way that you did, because for Ross, you can look at his record, and yes, the shortcomings are quite obvious in the losses, but Park also hasn't had the most picture-perfect performances every single time he's gone out there, even though he has been able to escape with the win quite a few times. But the thing I do really like about Park is he doesn't need a high volume of takedowns to get a lot of work done on the mat. When he gets you down to the ground, he is able to make a lot of those opportunities. That'll be interesting to see, because Shannon Ross has these 2 very distinguished versions of himself. When he's the guy moving forward, using that left body kick, which I really like too when he's able to switch that, and he throws a nice jab, he throws really good volume too. The only thing about Ross that I don't like, and we have seen it come up a few times in the UFC, is he seems like you can fool his left hand. Be it with leg kicks, be it body shots, whatever it is, he'll try to throw that kick away, and then he can be open for that right hand coming over the top. Be it with the overhand, be it with the hook. It's just a defensive liability that I do worry about. And listen, is Park going to be the guy who's going to fake underneath and Chad Mendez him over the top? Probably not, but that has been a recurring theme in a lot of these Ross's fights. And if he's not able to fix that, maybe it doesn't come up in this Park fight, right? Maybe he is able to win this fight, defensive takedowns to look good on the feet. But at another point in your tenure at the bantamweight division, you're going to fight, at the flyweight division, you're going to fight somebody who is going to be able to hit you and really make you regret not being able to fix that pretty
Another one of those fights. It's the Brundage Dice. It's like, you're 1-4 in your last 5. Why are we even here? Why are we getting this extra fight?
But I was excited about Ross in the regional scene. Like, I thought he was going to be really good.
Well, yeah, he had the fight on Dana White's Contender Series where he fought Vinicius Salvador. He gets finished in that one, but they still give him a UFC contract. Ross then shares the wildest story ever. Former mechanic, leaves his job, becomes an MMA fighter, but also blood poisoning in the aftermath of the Vinicius Salvador fight. So, Matt, when I was looking at this fight and I opened up and I said, True Blue, when you look at Shannon Ross, this guy's a True Blue fighter. He's 13-8. Jalen Turner, if he lost to Bobby Green last weekend, was 13-8 too. So there has to be an option there. But True Blue, Matt, blue with the hair. I went with the Fear of the Dawn album by Jack White. I figured, how could I talk about this fight and incorporate a record? I thought Jack White's Matt. I'm going to play a little game here, and we're going to go side 2. Side 2 has these songs on it, Matt, and I'm going to relate them to Shannon Ross, and I'm going to add one word or no words to talk about his overall run in the UFC. We're going to go his career. It's at dusk. Ask, what's the trick in making my love stick? That's a good song, Matt. Number 3, winning. That was then, and this is now. Yosophobia. Matt, that's the Fear of the Dawn. So we got a little bit of that because the start didn't go all that great. Now we're here. And then the next one, when it comes to it, he's been losing morning, noon, and night. And he's got to be shedding that velvet and picking up a win, Matt. So
not afraid of the morning, terrified of the ocean, though.
Fear the Dawn. Fear the Dawn, a good record.
Don't trust it.
By Jack White. But when I do look at this one, Matt, Shannon Ross has the power in those strikes to where when he sits down on them, Hyun Park can get caught. And you saw that in the fight against Top. No, he was a very good striker. But in that one, it was a straight left down the pipe. It was a right hook, and then it was an overhand left. They land, Park goes down. The Sunguk Choi fight, as that one wears on, Choi's really able to land some good shots. And if you look at it just overall, it was tied by 2 of the judges going into the 3rd round, and one judge somehow had it 20-18 for Park. But again, in the 2nd round, he gets dropped by a right hook, and then there was a kick that was caught, and a right hook was landed by Sunguk Choi. So for Park, he can leave himself out there to get countered, even though he's won 7 in a row by finish.
Describing it as it was 1 round apiece going to the 3rd. That's a lot of fights, to be fair. That's not like an indictment on anybody. That's the majority of MMA fights you watch. It is an interesting fight. To be fair, though, we are right to bring up the fact that Park has got hurt, but he has to be able to fight through said adversity too, and that also has to be said. Like, we at least know what he looks like when he does get hit, and he is able to accomplish a lot of these takedowns and still able to get the submission, which is nice.
Ross looking for his first win since your birthday in 2020, November 27, 2020. So Shannon Ross looking for the first dub in a while. He is the underdog. If we have a look on Topology, Matt, surprise to us as they are to you, the total votes here, I'm going to say over under 85% Park just on the recency of it.
I think it'll be the favorite, but I think it'll be under that. No, it's over.
801 total votes, 97% Park, 66% by knockout, 17% by submission. For the 3% that have Ross, 38% by decision, 27% by knockout. And Shannon Ross, in these losses, he's been getting hit, he's been getting hurt, and then he's ended up losing. Even that Airseg fight, big right cross, it drops him, and then Airseg's able to get the back, he's able to get the finish. But if you look at it for Ross, decent wrestling, decent grappling, so Park's going to have to do something, and he's not the most active guy on the feet either. So, again, I do have a hard time with this one. I do like Park because I think his wrestling is quite good, and hopefully he can add a wrinkle having been off since February of this year when he was able to win the Rhodes UFC tournament. But this isn't necessary. It's one of the, I guess, easier fights in terms of numbers and names, but I don't think any fight's going to be easy for Park in the UFC.
I don't, but I think we are underselling his grappling maybe a slight bit. Like, Ross does have decent grappling, don't get me wrong, but I think Park is much better than just decent on the mat in terms of what he's able to do when he is able to get the top control. If he gets on top of Ross early in a round, let's say with 3 minutes left, he's going to be able to accomplish a lot in that time to where Ross is going to need a knockdown or a significant amount of damage to really tilt the tide in his favor. So I agree with you. I do like Park in this matchup, but hopefully Ross can make it really competitive and land some of those good shots in the feet.
Both of us going with peace of mind. Hyun Park in the matchup. Some big time fights in this card, Matt. Of course, up at the top, Smith taking on Rountree. You've got Song Yadong taking on Chris Gutierrez. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. banger at welterweight. It's sad that this is at the UFC's apex with the absence of fans because we have France's heir, Kevin Jousset. He's going to be taking on the assassin, Song Kenan. And Matt, why would I be excited about this fight? Because Song Kenan is always an underdog and he always shows up to bang, even in his losses. Look at his fight against Max Griffin, where the kicks and the punches, they took over. Look at his fight against Ian Gary, where he drops him into questionable circumstances, but he ends up getting finished himself in the third round. Look at his last time out as a really big underdog against Rolando Bedoya, where everybody counted out Song Kenan. Did I pick him to win? No, but guess what? I previewed that fight to the best of my abilities, and I said, watch out for this guy, Song Kenan. He is a problem. He had Rolando Bedoya on skates. Dropped him in the second round, an unaccredited knockdown. Dropped him for reals in the third round. That one got the 1 KD in the stat sheet. And when you look at a guy like Song Kenan, his boxing is what got him to the dance. I'm going to throw some pictures up there for Kenan because this is the craziest part about it. He would have got a big pop from the crowd if he were to fight in Shanghai where this friggin' card was supposed to be. But he's not this time out. He's trained at different gyms throughout the time. Team Alpha Male when he moved over to the States. Then Killcliff FC for the recent fights. For this fight card, he's training at Bang Tao Muay Thai. Why would I get excited about that? Well, fighters from Bang Tao recently, a little bit of 50-50, right? Kelvin Gastelum wasn't really going all that well. Zach Reese trained there. Boy, he got mowed down last weekend. But Zhang Wei Li's trained there too, and those Hickman brothers know how to get it done. No, why would I be excited about that? If you've never open up the YouTubes and watch Song Kenan fight Brad Riddell, you should do that right now. If you've never watched Song Kenan fight Israel Adesanya, please, I implore you to do it because Song Kenan at the very start of that fight, look at this guy, grappling against Israel Adesanya, finding success until he gets kicked a bit and he loses. Look at him against Brad Riddell, landing big overhand rights until he gets finished in the second round. Song Kenan, there's usually no but, by the way. But if you look at him overall in the UFC, the knockdown ratio, it's in fuego, and this guy's striking is very good. He's just a very slept-on guy because he's had bouts of inactivity, but now the guy's back.
I would agree. He is a very skilled fighter, and that's the thing I like about Song Kenan. You do look at the boxing, and that might be the highlight of his game, but like you bring up in the Adesanya matchup, and through a lot of his previous fights too, he does have a nice offensive wrestling game to go along with that. He might not be the most progressive of grapplers in terms of getting past the guard and going for a lot of crazy chokes and whatnot, but he does do a good job being able to switch it up with his levels, especially if his opponent is very aggressive. And I'll be really interested to see if he decides to do that in a matchup like this, because Song Kenan is one of these fighters who, when he stays technical, there's not a lot of fighters who can beat him. But once he does gain in confidence, it's almost the worst thing for him. And if he does start to shoot a little bit wild and not keep the straight shots, because that's the thing about Song's boxing, he will throw a looping shot from time to time, but his highlight is the jab. It's the straight right down the middle. And if he can stick to some of those weapons, and again, maybe even mix in the offensive takedown, it will be interesting to see how he goes out there and fights somebody like Jousset, because Jousset is a massive fighter for this division. In the welterweight division, I don't know how many guys outside of like prime Douglas Lima and Bellator can match him in size in a division like this. And we know he's got big pop in the hands, but I was really impressed to see in his last matchup, to see him finish with that rear naked choke. It was nice to see over Crosby, who's a fairly decent fighter in his own right.
And that's a funny thing for Kevin Jousset. We talked a lot about him before that Kiefer Crosby fight, so let's throw it on over to a clip about Air Jousset. But when we look at Kevin Jousset, again, this is a guy, city kickboxing. You see him with the Adesanyas of the world and so on and so forth. But when you look at a guy like Jousset, he grew up in France training as a judoka, and he made it very, very far in the country. Junior national bronze medalist in the discipline. He was on the French national judo team. And then when he reached 17, 18 years old, he moved down to Australia. Started training at Absolute Mixed Martial Arts. That's a gym that you're going to see Jack Farr Jenkins out of on this card, and then eventually over to New Zealand to train out at CKB. And when you watch these Jousset fights, Matt, again, he's a guy, I struggle in a couple of respects. Kiefer Crosby gets hit by long-rangey strikers. Kevin Jousset's striking defense is tall chin, up in the air, hands out. And Jousset doesn't really respond well to his opponents kind of crowding a lot of the distance.
He tries to just meet them halfway
and
with shots,
landing a lot of the hooks. Now, both these guys throw good leg kicks, but you brought it up. Kevin Jousset, kind of like a Jack Jenkins, leg kicks are almost his bread and butter. And if you do get into the clinch, Jousset being a judoka, he kind of waits and waits. Even his opponents, they can hold him back up against the cage. Traditional takedowns can take Jousset down, but when he's able to get some of those Koshi Guruma positions or those odd angle trip takedowns, Jousset really is a master of those. So again, if you look at Jousset's...
I don't know if he's a master of them. He can do them.
If you look at Jousset's record, he has a 2019 finish loss to Jack Della Maddalena, who you've seen go far in the UFC. He also has a split decision loss from a few years ago for the title over with Eternal against Caleb Rideout. It's a split decision loss. I was surprised that Rideout won that fight after going back and watching it, because Jousset does get hit quite a bit, but there was a 50-45 in there, 49-46 all for Rideout. You look at the last 3 wins over James Crowell, who was 0-1, then Priscus Fulgagnolo, who was 11-1, 39 years old on a 3.5-year layoff, and I thought, okay, this is going to be an easy win. Really, really close fight in that one. And then if you watch Jousset's last fight, I had to buy Fight TV to watch it against Kit Campbell. Campbell wins the first round. Second round's 50-50. And then Jousset's able to get it done with the ground and pound in the third round.
There's one thing Jousset does that I hate. He throws naked leg kicks. Like, he won't set them up with his hands before. He'll just throw. And it can get quite repetitive to where, okay, if he does fight an upper echelon striker welterweight, let's say Jeff Neal somehow gets healthy at some point and ever fights again. He would be able to have a field day with someone like Jousset, just because some of those motions are quite repetitive.
So again, 2 premier gyms, and for Jousset, you get that added advantage of, well, Adesanya fought Song Yadong years ago, so maybe you can build a little bit off of that if Adesanya's been around the gym. But if you look at it for Jousset, interesting to see him maybe build as a striker in certain respects, but you know that only having 1 submission win, it might not jump off a page, but we saw that on his run up, that he had good takedowns. Now, he can get beat by the volume. His striking defense is a little bit questionable, but we saw it on display against Kiefer Crosby. You got to withstand those big bursts and those big combos. He was able to kind of progress through that and get a big win his last time.
But that is the thing about Jousset. Unlike fighters, like Adesanya, I guess, if you pressure him a lot, if you're fighting, I guess Sean Strickland, of all people, can do it, or like Alex Pereira, then you can get to him. Jousset can get caught behind those 2 black lines, and that's what you worry about in a matchup like this, because I guess both these guys, to a certain degree, are such great fighters when they're the ones moving forwards, but both of them have some of those liabilities when they are in the retreat, so more than anything, whoever's advancing in this matchup is probably going to be the one winning a lot of these exchanges.
Well, and the big thing too, Kevin Jousset, with that judo background being his initial martial art, you look at it against Song Kenan, and we've seen him excel with some of his own offensive takedowns, but we've seen him struggle in certain fights with the takedown as well. So we'll see how that plays a factor for Jousset. He is favored in the matchup. We have a look at the Topology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. The fans don't like Song Kenan. I'm going to say over under 72.5% Jousset.
You made fun of me by the end of this, but I think you did kind of agree with me. Remember when I would always say, like, if you beat Zhalga Shumagulov, the record might not mean a lot because he had lost so many in a row, but it's a pretty good name to have on your resume. Song Kenan, like you said, does he get the respect of all the fans? Maybe not, but it's a good win to have on your resume if Jousset's able to win this one.
Guy had a performance of the night bonus against Bobby Nash and a fight of the night against Alex Morono, and people are going to sleep on him.
That's not much. If Jousset is able to get the victory over Song Kenan, that's a really nice win to have.
So over under 72.5% Jousset's my
I think they're going to be over.
I think they're going to be over. They're under. So 694 total votes, 68% Jousset, 62% by decision, 21% by knockout. For the 32% that I have Song Kenan, 66% by decision. Matt, in this one, I think Song Kenan's going to get the win in this, and I really do like the fact that he can go to the body and then up to the head. He's not the heaviest kicker. We did see it in a loss where he was able to throw a lot of kicks against Ian Gary, but overall, Song Kenan, the kicks aren't the biggest part accentuated in his martial arts, arcing. I just guess his journey, but he's not like a guy like Chris Gutierrez. But I like the boxing to where if he can keep Jousset guessing with his hands, they're already pretty low. If he's got to try and play the game of bringing them up and bringing them down, Song Kenan can really land some of those big strikes. And we saw that for Jousset against a much better boxer, but still in that same category, being Jack Della Maddalena. So for that reason, I like Song Kenan in the fight.
I'm going to go with Jousset for this reason. I like his ability to switch up his left hand, be it from a jab or a left hook, and I think that's going to be important to try to decept, or to try to confuse, Song Kenan, kind of the same degree as what you said. If Song Kenan can go to the body to confuse Jousset, I think Jousset can do that with the left hand and maybe even set it up with the right, but I'm also going to be interested to see, again, like I said, the biggest key to this matchup is the advancing party is probably going to be the one who's winning this fight.
Matt going with the former welterweight and middleweight Hex champ, Kevin Jousset, to get get the win. I'm going with the man representing Bang Tao, Muay Thai, Song Kenan. Let us know who you have down below in the comments section. Some big time fights on this card that you're not going to want to miss. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. Tides at play this weekend at middleweight, and Matt, the lunar cycle has Jun Park surging right now on a 4-fight win streak, 3 in a row by finish, and he's looked amazing in these performances. He's going to be taking on a guy who's hit low tide, he's bottomed out, the ship is sunk, it's Andre Muniz. And Matt, when you look at a fight like this, I mean, listen, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. People see a Canadian flag behind us and they think, hey, you guys wear international shirts and hats all the time. You must be Americans. No, we're not.
There's a lot more sports franchises in America, though.
We are Canadians. And with that, I want to throw up a rest in peace to a Maritimer, Matt. Today, Miles Goodwin passed away of one of our favorite bands, April Wine. And Matt, this fight has me thinking, I like to rock. And
What's your favorite April Wine song?
Probably Ooh, What a Night. That's my favorite April Wine song. When I was a kid, I used to play, and I wasn't a good hockey player. I played 1 year competitive in Adams, so I would have been 8 years old. But every time you went to play in the cold barns, they'd always play April Wine between the periods. And Matt, you know where I'm going, because you were a little kid going to my hockey games. When you'd go out to Burt's Corner, out towards Keswick Ridge, really cold rink, I had actually somebody this week go, hey, our kids have to play in Burt's Corner. What's it like? Oh boy, have fun. But they play Ooh What a Night at almost every single stoppage. Right. And I get so amped up. So I'm excited about April Wine, although rest in peace, Miles Goodwin. But I'm really excited about this fight. Hopefully some people get to get the Canadian flair to the music. But Jun Park, Matt, I went back and I watched from the start of his career, which might seem wild, but if you saw my Twitter today, you know where my head was at. I watched Jun Park from the start to where he is now. I watched Andre Muniz from the start to where he is now. And Muniz was a 2-1 favorite in his last 2 fights that he's lost. He was the dark horse of the division, ranked all the way up to 11th when he fought Brendan Allen. So you're buying low with that tide. You're buying high with Park, but I think this is an awesome litmus test fight.
Well, let's talk about Brendan Allen again, because this fight to me for Andre Muniz is almost like Brendan Allen's fight he had against Punahele Soriano, right? It was, hey, Brendan, we know how good your grappling is, but what more do you have to your game, and what improvements have you been able to make? And guess what? Brendan Allen's been able to make those improvements to the level of beat the brakes off Andre Muniz, and I didn't think he was going to do that, to be completely open and honest about it. But he has looked better performance in and performance out, right? I'm not telling you Brendan Allen's going to become champ, but I can't sit here and tell you he never will be. Sean Strickland became champ. Anything can happen, guys. But for Muniz, this really is the time to say, hey, I have started to make those pronounced improvements in not only my offensive wrestling, but just the overall striking game. Because Jun Park, I think, is a really good opponent to have for this type of a fight, right? He's well-rounded. He has the offensive takedowns. He has his own offensive boxing as well. And I do think on the feet, he's going to make Muniz uncomfortable. And that's where we're going to have to see what version of Muniz are we going to get. Because if he is uncomfortable on the feet, is he just going to kind of falter under that pressure?
Is he gonna strike? Does he have an ace up his sleeve? Because if you go to Andre Muniz's Instagram, I'm gonna throw a picture up there. He won the South American absolute Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt Championship, which is awesome. But it looks like he's been training for BJJ tournaments. If I look at Andre Muniz's striking game, it reminds me a little bit of a guy that fought last weekend and got beat. Reminds me exactly of Joe Selecki. If you look by the numbers, 2.17 strikes landed per minute to 2.03 absorbed. He's got a 53% strike defense rate. So he's got to kind of waltz his way in, try and defend a barrage. He gets the fight down to the mat. He doesn't do a lot of striking when it is at the mat. He's really heavy on top. He tries to break you down. He tries to get the submission. And the best example for Muniz, and both these guys have fought similar fighters. So Andre Muniz beat Eric Anders. And I can't say anything bad about Eric Anders because we were in that Wolverine music video for the Mummy Cats. And that was awesome. And it's pretty cool. Go check it out. But for Andre Muniz in that fight, what happens? Eric Anders hitting him hard, blitzing forward, offensive wrestling from Eric Anders. Muniz is able to get the submission win. Jun Park against Eric Anders, it was a tale of two different fights. Anders is doing well with the grappling. Park's doing kind of well with the striking. It's a split decision win, and it wasn't all that long ago. But it wasn't really a fun fight to look back on either.
You know what I worry about, and you're probably not going to agree with me, is Jun Park going to shoot the dumbest takedown of all time in MMA history?
So I'm glad you asked me that, Matt. So I said at the start.
Because I worry.
No. Whoa, get ready. I doubt any of you, and I mean anybody watching this video, has watched Jun Park fight Shavkat Rakhmonov, in the battle of M1 Global. And Matt, guess what? Watch that fight today. And what are they fighting? The Rage. Matt, what's a Rage?
It's a ring, but also a cage.
The ring
pretty
cage
cool.
hybrid. And it was a square, so it wouldn't have the fallouts like you'd have in old Pride events, but it keeps the action and the substance. Junyoung Park is beating Shavkat Rakhmonov with the striking and the wrestling, nearly gets submitted in the first round. Then in the second round, beating him with the wrestling, gets submitted. Gets himself out of one bad armbar in the first round, in the second round. Then I watched Junyoung Park fighting against Ray Cooper. He's outstriking Cooper. Cooper goes in for the takedown. Junyoung Park, anaconda choke, and he gets the submission win. So Park's one of those streaky guys to where the wrestling can win him some of the fights, the striking can win him some of the other fights. You saw him his last time out, drop Albert Duraev, gets a submission win over Duraev. That's amazing. But again, like a Joe Selecki, like Alencar that's on this card, Andre Muniz is to that extra level of a grappler. So you have to be really careful. And again, for Muniz, he was weird coming into the UFC. Beats Bruno Assis on Dana White's Contender Series 2018. Assis goes for takedowns, but Muniz wins. Taylor Johnson goes for takedowns in 2019, but Muniz gets the submission win. We all remember the fight against Antonio Arroyo, one of the worst ever, but Muniz is able to get the win there. Again, these guys have fought similar guys in the past, but for Park, again, he's won 4 in a row. Muniz lost 2 in a row, and all of a sudden, Junyoung Park's a 2-1 favorite.
The hotness.
That's kind of weird. So people are down on Muniz, people are high on Park, and I think, because fans are fickle, and they're a little bit like that, I think the Topology votes are going to show us the same. I'm going to say over under 75% Junyoung Park.
I think they're going to be under.
And they're over. Look at that. 863 total votes, 79% Park.
Barely. Let's not act like I'm the dumbest man alive for saying under.
No. You're fine. 49% have Park to win by knockout, 17% by submission.
That's not going to happen, guys. I don't think it will. I know it has in the past, but Junyoung Park's just not that. When he goes for the wrestling, it's a lot more of he'll get stuck in the guard, he's going to go for some ground and pound.
You said Andre Muniz.
I know. I've been
never
wrong on
submit
all of his
Jacare
fights,
Souza, and that was a submission of the year. Now for Muniz,
he broke his arm though. It wasn't the fact that he got him in a submission and kept on doing it. He flipped over his back and broke his arm.
You didn't want me to tell you were stupid for your pick on the percentages.
But that's what happened.
He broke his arm because he had the submission, so don't say anything too crazy. For the 21% that are Muniz, 57% have him to win by submission. Matt, who do you have in this fight? Because I have seen Park lose fights.
I have the underdog in this fight. I don't like the game of Andre Muniz in terms of, hey, you're going to go on and win the title. I know we have seen a lot of specialists, especially in the middleweight division, be able to get to really high heights, right? Sean Strickland, for the most part, I know he does have defensive wrestling, but for the most part, he is a striker first, and that's pretty much it. Adesanya, Pereira, a lot of these fighters have been able to get to the top of the mountain by being somewhat one note, but at least they'll have the defense in the other manner, whereas Andre Muniz doesn't necessarily have the defense on the feet, and that's what I do think is going to hold him back from a lot of these top tier fighters. But I do think on the mat, he's going to be able to get something tricky on Park. It might be a fight where Park's winning every round until he does lose one moment. But for some odd reason, I do like the underdog in this matchup. 69% takedown defense for Park in the UFC. It's pretty good. I mean, his last 3 fights all won by rear naked choke. He over wrestled against Shavkat Rakhmonov. The referee, a man who had a wooden cross in the middle, not Fedor Emelianenko, Vyacheslav Kiselyev. That guy will see some things through. But when you do look at it for Park in the UFC, 7-2, 1 loss to Fluffy Hernandez where he gets submitted, and 1 loss in a 2-round fight of the night against G-Rod, Matt. Gregory Rodriguez. And that was a wild fight and a lot of fun to go back and watch. But the strike differential, 4.94 to 3.66. And if he goes out there and he strikes, he's got a pretty darn good shot. Also of note in this fight, apex records for these two guys. Junyoung Park, 5-1. They've been his last 6 fights. He's an apex star. So he's not selling tickets.
Sadly. And for Andre Muniz, 3-1. 2 of them on Contender Series. He's got 1 against Bartosz Fabinski. Hey, Bartosz, don't go for the double leg with your head out there. And he did it. And 1 against Brendan Allan. So, for me, I like Junyoung Park in the spot. I think his striking is very good. I could see him getting himself into a bad position. It's all I did today was just, it's just memes of Junyoung Park going out there and getting himself into bad spots.
He's up 20-17 going into the 3rd round, just shoots the worst double leg you've ever seen.
But I do have the Iron Turtle. So, we're split on the pick on this one. It was a lot of fun to go back and watch tape getting ready for this, except for Muniz against Arroyo. It was so bad. But let us know who you have in this matchup. Some big time fun fights left on this card. I'm jazzed about Sumudaerji and Allan
How could it not
Nascimento.
be?
You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
In a fight that was booked earlier on this year, but it fell out unfortunately, now we get it. Coming up in the small Apex cage, a possible fight of the night between a couple of lightweight bangers. We have Nasrat Haqparast, a channel favorite, taking on Jamie Mullarkey, also a channel favorite. Matt, I'm not joking.
Might be some fights in the comment section.
I absolutely love this fight. For Nasrat Haqparast, he was supposed to take on Mullarkey earlier on this year. The fight falls out. Francisco Prado comes in. Jamie Mullarkey dog walks him. And then he has a tough fight after that and loses. But Mullarkey's last time out, he looked pretty damn good. And for Nasrat Haqparast, he's been able to ring off a couple of big-time wins in a row. And if you look at it, UFC record for these two guys combined, it's been underwhelming to what their skills are and what the hype's been. It's 12-8 overall. If you look at the knockdown ratio, Nasrat Haqparast 5-4-1 against. Jamie Mullarkey 2-4-3 against. And we said it a few fights ago. Mullarkey gets put on skates a lot, and a lot of people in the comments section ripped us apart.
Take an X-ray of that chest, though.
For Mullarkey a couple of fights ago, beating Muhammad Naimov in the first round, beating him at the start of the second round, goes in tight, gets hit with a big-time hook, and gets dropped. His last time out, he was able to look really good against John McDessie. And again, for Nasrat Haqparast, his last two times out, a fight against John McDessie, he beats him quite soundly a year ago. His last time out, I don't know how that fight didn't get fight in the night against Landon Quinones. We sold you a bill of goods on it. Thank goodness it delivered. But you might not know this. Nasrat Haqparast set himself a personal record inside of UFC's octagon. He landed 171 significant strikes to 148 that Landon Quinones was able to land. And man, that was a really close competitive fight. And so for that and for everything, I think this is going to be an awesome fight.
It is a phenomenal fight. And this fight reminds me a little bit of like when Tim Means fought Matt Brown. You know, just guys kind of in the middle of the division who, with a win, it will propel them up. A loss might be a little bit devastating. That might be slightly too harsh of a word. But this is a very pivotal fight in the careers of both these men because Haqparast, I would say, had the more hype out of these two when he made his UFC debut, but they are both in that same category of fighter in the UFC, to where if you're a prospect, you're going to want to fight both these guys, and guess what? If you beat them, you're going to make your name off them and then get a really big fish after that. But they're also not just going to lose to every prospect, right? They are going to turn a lot of those talents back, and I also like the fact that they're both pretty well-rounded. I know they will show their striking a lot more than the grappling. I would say they both will, but they both have the wrestling and the offensive grappling in the back pocket. I will be interested to see if either fighter does use it. Now, I gotta be honest, if we see either fighter shoot for a takedown, it's probably because they're getting in a little bit of trouble on the feet. Now, this is what
I don't think so.
No,
I think hold on. I listened to an interview by Toby from Heavyweight MMA on YouTube. Shouts to Toby. No offense, but I hadn't heard of him before, and there weren't a lot of views on it, but he interviewed Jamie Mullarkey before this week, and he also interviewed Shannon Ross. So check out his channel. It's small, help it grow. If there's anything I can do in the last 2 weeks of this, go grow that channel. But if you look at it from Mullarkey, he talked about the fact that this camp, he spent a lot of time at Central Coast. He's gotten a little bit of sparring in at Freestyle with Joe Lopez. That's a Volkanovski camp. And he's mixed things up, obviously, with Ross Pearson. Now, Toby kind of leads him along in this interview and feeds him the answers. So it was a little bit odd that way. But Toby had said, like, hey, look at the fight that Dan Hooker had. Dan had a lot of success with the takedowns. Maybe that's what you're going to want to do.
Dan's a way better fighter, too.
And it almost sounded to me like that might be what Mullarkey might do. And he's had a lot of success with his takedowns, like against Fares Ziam. You think of the Brad Riddell fight, the fight of the night. He's had success with his takedowns as Mullarkey.
They're both a lot more stationary of fighters than a Nasrat Haqparast. When Haqparast is at his best, not only is he a very high-volume fighter, like you mentioned, he's moving those feet really well, too. And I do think it's going to be difficult if Mullarkey's not able to get a ton of respect on the feet, like a Riddell was able to get with Mullarkey, or like Dan Hooker was able to get with Haqparast. I just don't know if his wrestling for wrestling's sake is going to be effective enough to go out there and shoot a high volume. Maybe he's going to incorporate it in his game. I just don't know if we see Jamie Mullarkey put on the wrestling shoes, and it's going to give him the best opportunity to win this fight.
He had 3 against Francisco Prado, which is the fight he was supposed to have against Nasrat Haqparast. He had 3 when he was out there taking on Muhammad Naimov. He had 5 against Fares Ziam. When
I
he
think
takes
the
on good
footwork of Haqparast is much better than all of those fighters. I don't really think it's close, to be honest. He moves his feet very well.
We've seen Haqparast in the losses. I mean, the short notice UFC call-up against the former Bellator tournament champ, Marcin Held. We also saw Haqparast against Dan Hooker lose due to that. But when you look at it, again, for Haqparast, I mentioned the Held loss. Then there were a lot of good wins.
He also
there was
lid held up on the feet.
The Thibaut Goody fight of the night. When you look at it for Haqparast's next loss, and his only other knockdown was against Drew Dober in a southpaw versus southpaw matchup on a check hook that's able to drop him. But if you look at it for Haqparast overall, I'll be interested to see what kind of representation we get in his camp. Because last time it was all sorts of different gyms. For some reason, I know he used to train at TriStar, but he brought Firas Zahabi in. You don't see a lot of fighters do that anymore. And if you do look at it for Mullarkey, in the UFC, he's only faced 2 southpaws, and he's 1-1 against them. One's Michael Johnson. Remember how well it went until it didn't. He did get dropped in that one. And one is, of course, Jalen Turner, and he got dropped in both of those fights. So for Jamie Mullarkey trying to figure out the southpaw, it's gotten him dropped twice in 2 of those fights. We'll see how it plays out for him. And again, when you do consider it for a guy like Jamie Mullarkey, he's had fight of the nights in the UFC. Haqparast had 1 in the UFC. Haqparast, a 2-1 favorite in the matchup. We have a look at the Tapology vote. See what the fans are thinking. I'm going to say over under 70% Haqparast.
I think it's going to be over.
The fans are wilding this week. 837 total votes, 82% Haqparast, 80% have him to win by decision. For the 18% that are Mullarkey, 73% have him to win by decision. I have Nasrat Haqparast in this fight, Matt. I think he hits a lot harder. I think the fact that he goes to the body to bring the hands down on Mullarkey, if Mullarkey's hands come down even a little bit, he leads with his chin and he gets hit quite a bit. So for me, I like Haqparast in those spots.
This is much easier said than done. I agree with you. I've also got Haqparast. But if Mullarkey is able to plant his feet in the pocket, and if he's able to time Haqparast on some of those entries, because Haqparast does move his feet a lot, and sometimes he can jump into the pocket. And if Mullarkey can meet him halfway, he does have surprising power. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Jamie Mullarkey's Justin Gaethje. But if Mullarkey's able to meet Haqparast halfway with one of those straight shots down the middle, we could easily see him hurt Nasrat and maybe even get a finish afterwards. But I do think the speed of Nasrat is going to be the X factor for him, and while ultimately get the win.
Yeah, when Mullarkey was talking about his camp with Toby from Heavyweight MMA, I might as well link that down below. But he talked about the fact that he was nursing a few... He didn't use the words I'm going to use, so I'm going to paraphrase because the word he used was awfully close to a bad word. But nursing a few injuries, and he got through them as he worked through camp. So both of us going with Nasrat Haqparast to get the win in the matchup. Channel favorite, a couple of them here. And in the next fight, a couple more channel favorites. Andrea Muniz is taking on Jun Young Park, and I love that fight. So listen, you're going to want to check that video out. All of them here in the full card video. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. The second of 3 Team Alpha Male fighters on the card. The main card, it is Sumudaerji's last time out, a loss in 2022 in a 2-round fight of the year contender against Matt Schnell. A long layoff for him. Sumudaerji's last win 1,053 days ago against Zaruk Adashev, looking to get back in the win column, taking on Puro Oso, Allan, Nascimento. Matt, we talk about premier gyms in this one. For Sumudaerji, Team Alpha Male, working out with Song Yadong, Danny Castillo, that again, he scares me. And of course, Luana Santos is on this card. Allan Bagoso, that's probably a good help at 125. He's there to train with. But when you look at a guy like Allan Nascimento, Team Diego Lima, shoot the box. I mean, the guys that can strike there. Thomas Almeida's smile scared me since he came into the UFC. That guy can get it done. But Charles Oliveira, Daniel Santos, the guy's Willie caught for a reason. There are some really good fighters out of that gym. And Allan Nascimento is one of them. And if we talk about Sumudaerji out of one side of my mouth having a 2-round fight of the night, fight of the year contender against Matt Schnell, Allan Nascimento in Dana White's Contender Series 2018 in a split decision loss against Raulian Paiva. That's one of the best fights. If you've never seen it, you got to go watch it. So for Nascimento, loses that fight against Paiva, takes a long layoff, beats Edvaldo Lima, and then it was like, okay, whatever. Comes into the UFC, loses a split decision against Tagiro Lambekov that I thought Nascimento won, but the last 2 fights, he completely out-wrestled Jake Hadley, which surprised a lot of people. And then Nascimento's last time out, he submitted Carlos Hernandez. Got to be some Spider-Man memes in the back for this week. But Nascimento, the reason why we liked him coming into Contender Series and then coming into the UFC, this guy's the biggest flyweight.
He is a huge
fighter.
fighter.
I don't list him as 5'8.5" as a joke.
But to be fair, though, Sumudaerji, he's rangy.
He's big and he's rangy. When he gets hit, it's bad. But for Nascimento, he's got good striking, but the wrestling, the grappling, he's big on top. He's good in the scrambles. But when you look at these two guys, it was somewhat of a stretch that Nascimento made it into the UFC. It's wild that Sumudaerji got signed off a loss with WLF Wars, loses to Luis Smolka by submission, then wins 3 in a row to the point where he's a giant favorite against Zurukadashev in kind of a wishy-washy fight, if you remember it. And then when Sumudaerji fought Matt Schnell, it was a great start, it was a bad end, but it was a wild fight. Sumudaerji's kind of been just all over the map.
But that's what makes him so much fun to watch. Like, I like watching Sumudaerji because he does have such a roller coaster to his style. We know he has a lot of weaknesses on his back. He might not have the greatest durability on his feet, but he's also a big fighter for the weight class, has exceptionally fast feet when he decides to use them. Here's the thing, he doesn't always decide to use them, and he will get flat-footed as the fight progresses, but when he is at his best, using those dart-in kind of blitz attacks with his own boxing, he's a very difficult fighter to pin down and to deal with in the early goings of this matchup. And the thing about Nascimento is, I do think he is the more well-rounded in this matchup, right? He's got a great ground game, phenomenal offensive submissions, and he does have good Muay Thai himself on the feet, but I do think the speed of Sumudaerji, at least early, is going to give Nascimento quite a few issues if he's not able to get his hands on him and at least use the clinch to slow Sumudaerji down, because I do think the footwork of the Tibetan Eagle, which I think is a great nickname, it's odd, but it's great. I do think his footwork is a lot faster, and it's something that Allan Nascimento is really going to have to deal with, be it with the leg kick or some of that clinch work to slow him down.
Yeah, and Nascimento's an interesting guy, right? Because he does have more of a traditional Muay Thai stance.
He's very upright.
Been kind of adapted to MMA, but he's really upright. He'll throw that kind of wonky knee out there like an Anthony Smith, and Sumudaerji's not a really big kicker. He's more mixes it up with his boxing, and I find it funny, you know, for Sumudaerji, last win, I mentioned it, it was a really long time ago, back in 2020, and all the way back when Sumudaerji won his last fight, it was January 20th, 2020. So it's been a while. 2021, rather. So I made a mistake. But if we go back, Matt, to January 20th of 2021, the #1 song in the world, can you guess it? Silent pause for effect.
The Box by Roddy Ricch.
No, I actually think that song's pretty good. Haven't heard it in a long time.
I know, that's why I thought it was #1. I didn't think it was bad.
Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo, and I don't even know a single word, the melody, or how that song goes. So I don't know anything about Olivia Rodrigo other than the Paramore stuff. But that's all I know. I'm not a TikToker, see? I'm not a beat bopper. I just know the old stuff. And when it comes down to this matchup, Matt, I think the older guy gets the win in the fight. I mean, Nascimento is favored here. We have a look at the Tapology vote. Surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over, under. I think it's going to be a little bit closer. I'm going to say 62.5% Nascimento.
I think it's going to be like 80, so I'll say
really? And it is. So 823 total votes. Nascimento commanding an 81% line
Well, I just
share.
think it's the weaknesses that we've seen in Sumudaerji off his back, right?
75% have him to win by submission, do they, with Nascimento. And again, when it comes to Nascimento, we saw him struggle with the takedown on the regional scene, WLF Wars. We saw it in the Smolka fight. We saw it in the Schnell fight. But when it comes down to Sumudaerji, the guy cracks, he hits hard, and the fans were on him before he's missed this year and a half. So we'll see how this fight plays out. I think Nascimento is a little bit more well-rounded. And when you're taking on a good wrestler, you can struggle in some of the scrambles like against Tagiro Lambekov, but we don't see that as much out of Sumudaerji. So for me, I do like Nascimento in the fight. I guess you could point to the Paiva fight to show some good spots from Sumudaerji. I just didn't really like how that fight went on against Zurukadashev either. So I do like Nascimento here.
The thing I will say about Sumudaerji, I could see him getting like an early knockdown, right? Like a flash knockdown, having early success with some of that long-range boxing, because you're right. He does fight from a very long distance for a guy who doesn't throw a ton of kicks. It is sort of that blitzing effect of jumping in from that long range. He has great success when he is able to land the straight shots, but I think Nascimento's going to get his hands on him at some point, and we've seen it fight in and fight out. Sumudaerji off his back is not the greatest fighter of all time. Nascimento with the ground and pound, and he's got tons of submissions. I think he'll be able to have a lot of success.
Both of us going with Diego Lima Shoot the Box's own Allan Nascimento to get the win. Matt, now it's time. Short notice. It was one of those Dana White announcements. Anthony Smith going to be taking on Khalil Rountree in the co-main event. You are not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. November 24th, and a Dana White announcement down from the commentary booth and into the friendly confines of the UFC Apex, a guy who's down to scrap the former title challenger, Anthony Smith. He's going to be taking on Ultimate Fighter not winner. It's Khalil Rountree Jr., Matt. Khalil Rountree is on an absolute heater right now. We talked about some fighters that are up, some fighters are down. Just like Junyoung Park on this card, a 4-fight win streak for Rountree. His last time out, inside of a round, knocks out Chris Daukaus clean. And now he gets a big-time shot, again, on short notice, favoring him with the full count. And man, Bangkok ready from Southpaw to Syndicate. Khalil Rountree is a big-time problem. When you look at it for Anthony Smith, no stranger to the bright lights. He's 1-1 in co-main event spots in the UFC. One, of course, against Johnny Walker. One against Ryan Spann. So a little bit of wishy-washy there. But again, just like I said last weekend, Billy, don't you lose my number. Anthony Smith, the big wins over Ryan Spann, especially his last time out. But of course, 8 main events in the UFC, 5-3 in those spots. The only losses, Glover Teixeira, Rakic, and John Jones. So Smith, co-main events, main events, some big-time spots. He's fought some southpaws as well in the UFC, that being Khalil Rountree's stance. And this is a big-time opportunity for Rountree, maybe more so than Anthony Smith, who, I mean, even off his last win, he was calling for a title shot, and it seems like kind of just blew him by.
Well, he's had a couple opportunities in his career, I'd say.
Just one.
Here's the... I just mean, like, main event. Anthony Smith is the main event of every other of these fight nights,
Just like Stephen Bonner, T.
We don't have a lot of these left.
Wants to flush the dirt down the toilet.
How many effing Anthony Smith main events have we broken down? Like, it's just...
Eight.
Every 6 months, Anthony Smith
one of them once.
Main event. My whole point is, Anthony Smith has had a lot of these high-profile opportunities, so if Rountree's able to beat him shy of a title shot... Maybe Anthony Smith isn't the biggest name he can have on his resume, but this is a career-defining kind of a win that he could get because it puts him up into that top 10, top 5 category to where he only needs 1, maybe 2 more wins to get into the title picture. And let's be honest, 185, 205, heavyweight, they're all pretty wide open right now. So Khalil Rountree Jr., you never really could have imagined at one point could have reached this stage of the division, but good on him for making those improvements throughout his career because early on he was very much just a boxer, had very high hands, would throw a nice jab, a good right hand as well, but he has incorporated so much more of the Muay Thai in his whole entire style. The issue I have is I don't think he's as well-rounded as Anthony Smith. That's not a controversial statement, right? Anthony Smith, a very good offensive grappler. Every time you kind of forget about that part of his game, he'll always just bring out a submission win out of nowhere. But how much damage can Anthony Smith acquire before he is just a lesser fighter than what he goes into as? Because he has taken so much damage at this stage of his career. A lot of those early knockout losses I know were at 185, not 205. And I do think he did benefit from kind of an uptick in durability when he did move up those 20 pounds. But he's been in a lot of tough fights at this weight class too, and you just worry about how many more of those big shots he can take from a guy like Khalil Rountree, who might not fight with the highest volume, but you only need one against somebody like Anthony Smith to change the tide of the battle.
That's it. We know the Khalil Rountree, the kicks against Eric Anders, remember leg kicks, remember the soccer kicks against Carl Robertson.
For a guy his size, like he moves exceptionally quick, because Khalil Rountree Jr. is a massive fighter. He's a really muscular guy, but he moves from point A to point B as fast as anyone.
He does, and then there's some fights that go really well.
Sometimes.
Like I mentioned, there's some fights that go really poorly, like his fight against Marcin Prachnio. Everybody, myself, yourself, everybody included, thought that Rountree was going to be Prachnio, and then it was just peaks and valleys, and there were too many valleys of inactivity, and he wasn't able to get it done. Now, 4-fight win streak for Khalil Rountree Jr., the Bukauskas oblique kick, the Carl Robertson fight, like I mentioned, with the soccer kicks when he was down, Dustin Jacoby in a tight one, and then his last time out against Chris Daukaus, he gets the win. And again, it'll be interesting to see for Rountree how he gets himself moving, because he almost found himself into the Daukaus fight. There wasn't much going on at the very start, and then he started to open up. He gets the win. And for Anthony Smith, again, I kind of flashed my notes at the end of what you were saying. We don't watch tape together, and we don't write notes together. I have Muay Thai versus Muay Thai because for Anthony Smith, it's a little bit of that stance. We always mention him backing up behind the black line, get that knee up there.
Rountree destroys him if he does that. He's going to destroy that bottom leg and hit him with big hooks.
I do think so, but I wrote down something that you said. BJJ Smith, X Factor. I wrote down Olashechuk, Kutsilaba, Pedro, and Sanchez, Ultimate Fighter Season 23 finale. What do all of those fights, Olashechuk, Kutsilaba, Pedro, and Sanchez, have in common? Rountree gives up the early takedown, he pops back up, and then the takedowns continue. And the Olashechuk fight is a no contest because there were a little bit of substances
the Pedro
that
fight
weren't
was 8 years ago, too.
completely legal for for Olashechuk. So it was overturned to a no contest. But he struggled in all of those fights with the takedowns. Now, again, numbers on a page. Sanchez fought Smith. Sanchez fought Rountree. There are common opponents in all of this. But for Rountree, if it does get down to the mat, Anthony Smith with the jiu-jitsu, we saw that against Ryan Spann. We've seen that in other fights as well.
Do you know what this fight kind of reminds me of?
You've talked over me so much. Let me make my fucking point. Anthony Smith has fought 2 southpaws in the UFC. Has he won one? Yeah. Has he lost one? Yeah. He fought Cesar Muchachi Ferreira, and that fight, it went as well. No, it wouldn't. He lost that fight. But the big fight that I point to against the southpaw for Anthony Smith, that was years ago, in a bit of a comparison here, short, stocky, muscle-up guy moving up a weight class. We're talking about the former great, the GOAT with Bellator, Hector Lombard. Lombard wins the first. Lombard wins the second. In the third round, Dominic Cruz is going, man, Anthony Smith has got to pull together some combos and win this fight. Lombard enters in. Smith hits him with one shot. Lombard's down. Smith gets the win. It's a wild finish win. Smith hasn't fought a lot of southpaws. Smith has fought strikers before. I think on short notice, Anthony Smith has to put the wrestling shoes on because he has that cardio advantage, at least perceived, to being so well conditioned to big fights, main events as well. I think Smith has got to go out there and wrestle a bit in this fight.
I think this fight could look a lot like when Luke Rockhold fought David Branch. And I know David Branch was a really good grappler, but how did that fight go? Luke Rockhold has a really good top game for his grappling, has great strikes too, but he went out there and ate a lot of damage early, but slowly but surely, once he was able to get that top position and really utilize the BJJ, there was kind of levels to the game, and I could see Anthony Smith going through a lot of that early adversity, and like you said, putting on the wrestling shoes, and if he gets that top spot, and if he's able to land some of that ground and pound, his elbows are absolutely insane, be it from the feet or on the ground, and those could really change the tide of this one.
Yeah, a back flat TKO type of, listen, poor David Branch. He was so good with WSOF and in 2 UFC runs. He got knocked out by a friend of the show, a guy we haven't talked about all that much. But when you look at this one, Khalil Rountree, I mean, he is a pretty darn big favorite in the matchup. Again, this is on short notice. Rountree was supposed to fight last week, if I'm not mistaken, against Azamat Murzakanov. Murzakanov out, so now Smith takes the matchup. We have a look at the Tapology vote. Surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 70% Rountree.
I think they're going to be over.
And they are over. 718 total votes, 79% Rountree, 81% by knockout for the 21% that have Smith, 46% by decision, 38% by submission. So, Matt, do you have the warhorse in this one? The fans do. The odds suggest it.
I like Khalil Rountree Jr. in this matchup, but I do agree with how the votes break it down for Anthony Smith. I do think a submission win is somewhat likely for him, and he's able to go out there and get the win. Even off his back, maybe. We could see him get dropped by a big shot and kind of Fabricio Verdum, Fedor Emelianenko it. But I do like Khalil Rountree Jr. in this matchup. I think if he is able to land some of those early shots, like we've seen in earlier fights, he does tend to slow down as the fight goes on, but I think those early power shots are going to be enough to win it.
I'm going to go with Anthony Smith, and I this is impromptu, so I'm going to have to do it in post, but I'm going to add in a clip of the interview from when I was standing with him at UFC Moncton, because he talked about how swollen his knee was against Volkan Oezdemir.
My leg's a little banged up for sure. I was pretty sure that I had tackled the leg kick problem after the Hector Lombard fight, but clearly me and Mark need to sit down and figure that problem out a little bit. I knew he was going to throw hard leg kicks, but I thought that I'd be able to counter those with a hard right hand. And to be honest with you, even when I was checking him, he was kicking me out of my stance, so I wasn't able to. But it's just another thing we got to fix,
And that's a big problem for Smith. He gets kicked in the legs a lot, and he doesn't check leg kicks. And Khalil Rountree's got some of the biggest ones out there from southpaw. I like the well-roundedness of Smith, and I'm going to pick him in this matchup. I think the wrestling and just the overall well-roundedness could carry him to a win here. But Matt, we are split on this one. You're going with the Warhorse, Khalil Rountree. I'm going with Lionheart, Anthony Smith to get the win. Let us know who you have down below in the comments section. That only means one thing, Matt. We got a couple main events before the end of the year, and this one, it's Song Yadong taking on Chris Gutierrez, a big-time fight. You are not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
It's a big-time bantamweight pairing, and for a third straight time, Song Yadong, under the bright lights, gets a main event opportunity. He's going to welcome in El Guapo, Chris Gutierrez, Matt, the fans. They saw the thumbnail out there this week, and I've got Song Yadong where is the next contender? He wants a title shot, and you see the leg kick king Chris Gutierrez out there getting it done and continuing on. And his last time out, a reshuffle of opponents. He beats Alatang Lee, gets it done over 3 rounds, looked really good in that fight not that long ago. Now he gets another opportunity at a big name. And Chris Gutierrez, you'll remember, pay-per-view spot, retiring legend, knocks him out with a knee against Frankie Edgar. So Gutierrez has been in these spots, doesn't have a big social media following, but I know between the hardcores of the hardcores, they can appreciate what Gutierrez gets done. Now, the last time he went against another shorter, good boxer, at bantamweight, another leg kick king, it was Pedro Munoz, and Gutierrez favored, wasn't able to get it done his last time, or that last time out against Pedro Munoz, but he was able to prove it his last time out getting a win. Now, for Song Yadong, if you look at it, the no contest is against Cody Stamann in the UFC, lose the point due to an illegal knee. He's had a fight against Marlon Vera, Casey Kenny fight, Julio Arce, Moraes, the Sandhagen lost because of the cut. Listen, we've said this before. Sometimes your face, your eyebrows, they just evade you sometimes. And that fight was ended, though he didn't do all that well with the volume. But his last time out, Matt, for Song Yadong, we've seen high highs, we've seen low lows. Ricky Simone was on the uptick, and a lot of people picked him to win that fight. Song Yadong was able to pull away with his boxing. So I'm eager to get your thoughts on this fight, because I know the fans are going to be amped. Maybe more so for one side than the other.
It is a really interesting main event, and I'm happy that we are getting 5 rounds out of this matchup, because the winner, I think, has a ton to gain, and I don't know if the loser's really going to fall off a cliff, if that makes any sense, because I think this is a really well-matched fight, even though the odds might not suggest it is, because Song Yadong might be pretty well-rounded, right? We might not see as much of the offensive takedowns, because, let's be honest, he's defending so many more of those takedowns. He is such a great striker, but he is more well-rounded, but he's going to do what Chris Gutierrez does well, and that is stand in the pocket and try to use his boxing. And if he is so heavy on that lead leg, you brought it up, we talk about it all the time. What is Chris Gutierrez amazing at? He can chop your legs down and make you become a much different fighter than you are on your best day. But it was nice to see Song Yadong go out there and get a late stoppage against Ricky Simone. He had to put on, like, not only the wrestling shoes, but he had to really dig deep in that matchup, defend takedowns, land a lot of damaging strikes, and have his power carry very late in that fight. And I do think that fight going late is going to be very advantageous for him, not only in this matchup, but just moving forward in a lot of those fights. Because against Corey Sandhagen, he gets that nasty cut early, and he's really on the defensive in a lot of that matchups. I gotta be honest, he did more positive in that fight than I had kind of remembered upon initial just remembrance. I thought he got lit up for a lot of that matchup, but he was able to land his own decent strikes on the feet at point A to point B against a tall, rangier guy, because Sandhagen did look much bigger than Song Yadong, but he did a good job of using those blitzes forward, even with that damaged eye.
And in my mind's eye, I think of Chris Gutierrez as a bigger, longer fighter in this one. By the numbers, he's, an inch taller, and the reach is the same, but Gutierrez does hold his hands kind of chest to chin height, and he stands really tall in the pocket, and it opens up his hips to the leg kicks, whereas for Song Yadong, a lot more planted. He does have good footwork, and he mixes boxing and body, head quite well, and he can deal with the leg kicks, but if Gutierrez gets him rolling in the first round, that just completely throws game plans out of the water. You saw that against Vince Morales. You saw that against Andre Ewell. You've seen that for Chris Gutierrez, to where those leg kicks can pay a great dividends. Now, in the UFC for a guy like Gutierrez, and I misspoke when I said Ewell. We saw that in other Ewell fights. I was thinking of the fight he had against Charles Jourdain. But if you do look at it for Gutierrez in the UFC, he's a big-time winner over with the LFA against Ray Rodriguez, and he loses to Raoni Barcelos, a smaller, kind of good striker, kind of like a Song Yadong. We remember the draw against Cody Durden, that won a 10-8 first round, and then he's able to withstand and win the second, win the third. So a little bit different, compare and contrast, but these two guys have fought. Gutierrez beat Vince Morales with the leg kick. Song Yadong actually fought Vince Morales the last time he fought in China, and that was back in 2018, UFC Fight Night, Blades versus Ngannou 2. And there were a few different fighters on this card that were on that card. You had Kenan, Song Yadong, as well as Sumudaerji. Those two other guys lost, but Song Yadong was able to get a win. Both these guys have fought Alatang Lee. For Gutierrez, it was his last time out. For Song friggin' Yadong, it was back in 2013 on the regional scene. So pretty cool stuff there. When you look at this and you consider Gutierrez, he had the big rise, the loss to Munoz, kind of lost a lot of stock. He wasn't supposed to fight Alatenghe Lee, but he did. And as I mentioned, that was not that long ago. He was originally supposed to be taking on Montel Jackson. We were excited about that fight, did a video, thought Jackson was going to win. Ultimately, Gutierrez beats Alatenghe Lee. But for Song Yadong, I mean, you have abbreviated. Is it going to be Rob Font? The fight falls out. He gets Sandhagen. Was it going to be Piotr Jan? Well, I listened to an interview that Song Yadong did with Fanatics View. James Lynch, I haven't mentioned JHK at all this week. Sorry, JHK, but James Lynch gets to play. He asked if the rumors of the Jan fight were true, and Song Yadong said, in other words, he accepted the fight with Jan, but the UFC never sent the contract across. So I found that really interesting. What was his prediction for this fight? He said, and I quote, "My prediction? Just knock him out." And he also said that
is he Mike Perry?
The Shanghai to Vegas thing, he doesn't really know why they made the move, but in his corner, he's going to have Coach Marcus, his boxing coach, Uriah Faber, Danny Castillo, and Slavaklaus, Vyacheslav Borshev. So pretty good corner there. Matt, when you look at this fight, though, again, we know the boxing out of Song Yadong. We know the complete game that can be from Chris Gutierrez, but we see him a lot more on the defensive with the takedowns than he can be on the offensive, and I think his offensive wrestling is pretty good. I think his cardio is pretty good. But for me, when we look at this one, I mean, Song Yadong is a pretty darn big favorite in the matchup, and I'm eager to see what the fans have to say over on the YouTube community tab. We throw it out there every single time. Where do you think the fans are going to be on this one?
I think they'll be around 80% Song Yadong, but I would put it under personally, because I do think Gutierrez, with his leg kicks and his style, Song's available to be hit. I know he moves his feet well, but he moves his feet well on the retreat and when he's defending takedowns. When he's the guy being the aggressive and the forward party, he can still get clipped by some of those kicks, and if that's the case, it could make this fight closer than, like I said, the odds would suggest.
You said over under 80. You said you think it's going to be under, though. I'm going to say over. We have a look, and Matt, it's really close. 819 total votes, 83% Song Yadong, 17% on Gutierrez. Last thing, Song Yadong is becoming an extremely well-rounded fighter. What they have done with him at Team Alpha Male is incredible. This is a feeder fight if I've ever seen one. Pick him MMA. Song will check the leg kicks at close range, knock him out. I see a 4th-round knockout. That's a really tough game plan.
He knows something we don't.
You're gonna try and counter and check leg kicks against Gutierrez. It's tough. Zolas is saying Gutierrez by leg kicks. We got Ryan McKeown saying I don't know why I struggle with Ryan's last name, but McCowan saying Song gonna knock him out. And we'll go with PPB 1962. Chris is overrated. Best win is over the ghost of Frankie Edgar. I don't know. I'd say probably the win in the thumbnail over Vince Morales is the best one. Just the TKO due to leg kicks. I do
You'll
like
see a lot of guys getting main events, though, off of leg kick TKOs over Vince Morales.
No, that's why I didn't get one so soon.
But that's why that guy's comment does make a little sense.
I do have Song Yadong in the fight because I think the overall volume, the pressure, and the fact that I've said this a few times this card, mixing up body to head and really changing things up, energy system, keeping Gutierrez guessing. I think I mentioned it in another video, and I don't just say this to be contrived, but Gutierrez's elbows usually always in a good spot to block both his liver because he's got long arms, blocks his liver, and it's pretty high up to his chin so he can move it just ever so slightly, but I think he's going to struggle with the pressure of Song Yadong here, and I think Song Yadong can get the win.
I do think Song Yadong has a decided speed advantage, especially with the hands in this matchup. If he walks into a big shot, I wouldn't be surprised. And again, if Gutierrez can use some of those up-the-middle attacks to halt the forward momentum of Yadong, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. But the speed of Song, and also his own elbows, like Song does a good job on the inside of grabbing that single control on the back of the neck and then throwing elbows himself. And if he's able to use that against Gutierrez to, again, just throw more question marks out there, he might be able to walk away with a win. But that last win against Simone, having it be so late with the stoppage, it really did show that Song has been making those improvements to his game, I think.
Yeah, I mean, overall, unfortunate that it goes from Shanghai to the U.S. because for Song Yadong and the other fighters out of Asia, it would have been a really good opportunity. Sure. And Song Yadong, I mean, he's from the northeast of China, and Shanghai is kind of east but more south, so to speak. So if you do look at it, there would have been representation there, but ultimately in this one, both of us going with Song Yadong. Watch out for those elbows. Chris Gutierrez, there's times when he can do the Merabdashvili and just start spinning. You saw it against Bakary Dana. But overall, Matt, a really big card. I mean, 5 total ranked fighters on this one. There's a lot of fights to look forward to, some thrown in on short notice. It was announced tonight, Sunday night, Matt. Chris Chris Gutierrez, Song Yadong just being an exciting one. But it was announced that we have Steve Garcia taking on Costa. That one's at lightweight. So I'll throw a disclaimer up there, but we were under the impression it was still at featherweight. So that one is going to be at a lightweight contest. Matt, I know we talked about it, but what's your favorite fight on this card?
I like Haqparast versus Mullarkey. It should be a fun fight. Again, is it going to decide on who wins the title next year? Probably not, but it's just a well-matched fight. I do think stylistically it's one that's probably going to go late. We might get a stoppage, too.
I think that one's mine too, but I'll throw another one out there. Song Yadong, Kevin Jousset. These two guys are hungry. They're both coming off of really big wins, and they need more to build momentum in a loaded 170 division. So look out for those. Question mark kicks on Saturday, 2 hours before the prelims. If anything changes this week, fights added, fights dropped, you can always find us here. YouTube, Instagram, and X at Fight Night Picks. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.